So I should be live on YouTube as well. Is there any way for you to verify that, Rhonda?
Well, I was surfing.
Oh,
I don't know.
well.
Hold on. I'll go check.
I see you're just going to wait to the last second.
Well, no, I have TikTok live. YouTube
TikTok.
live also, but I was surfing YouTube.
Well, I don't want to show it on my screen because I don't know what behind the scenes stuff it shows when I'm testing my feed on the backside. So
It says you're live, so yeah.
all right, perfect. So we're just going to be a little early on live, and it's funny because somebody on YouTube specifically complained that I talk too much before I get into the meat of the episode or the live, and so because of that, I've been trying to delay the live on TikTok. But I suppose really that's one person that said it, and two, people over here probably have just as much of a complaint about it. So if I'm not going to fix it over there, why do I fix it over here or vice versa or whatever? So I'm just going to be consistent. And I'm just going to fire both up for now. So if you don't like the prelude, interlude, the fact that I go live a little early so that the room has time to build up a little bit and we can get started on a hot minute, then so be it. This is just intro. This is just fluff. This is just filler until we get to about 7 minutes from now when we will do the formal get together. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up my notes because everything looks good on my end. YouTube is going. So by the way, if you want to watch this show with the documents that I'm going to review, I will be reviewing some documents tonight. I will be reviewing some websites as well. I have highlights and sections to read, which of course, if I read them to you on TikTok, you're going to hear every line of it that I read. However, if you want to see the parts I'm skipping over so that you can call me out and go, dude, you skipped over that paragraph and that made all the difference, you can correct me and watch me on the live. Actually, don't correct me in the episode. Correct me later and we'll talk about it on why I chose not to do that paragraph. But if you want to see what I left out for some reason, because I'm not going to read the entire article, I'm going to read the highlights. Tonight is going to be, thank you for asking, Priscilla. Tonight is 100% Kohberger. We've got so much to cover on Kohberger that tonight's going to be on Kohberger. I will try to make Wednesdays on Luigi as long as a huge document dump doesn't come out on Kohberger again and nothing new on Luigi. So I kind of go with what has the most to do with. Luigi's case has been a little cold at the moment. However, I can always find plenty of things to talk about on Luigi. So if nothing new comes out in Kohberger tomorrow or today, then I will make an effort to make Luigi the subject, and I will dig into the arsenal, even if there aren't any new news stories, so that we can talk about Luigi. Sometimes, by the way, I will have just an open Q&A, meaning anyone who follows my account is welcome to ask questions about Luigi or Kohberger. And that actually went surprisingly well the other day when I had an open Q&A. We literally bounced back and forth moment to moment between Kohberger and Luigi, and it worked out pretty well. But I understand that some people only want to hear about one case or the other. So since tonight is dedicated 100% to Kohberger, Brian Kohberger, then we will try to make Luigi the focus of the next episode. Hey, thanks for the hat. Sweet. I've been waiting for the sunglasses. Like I wear sunglasses, those dark shades in so many videos. I was hoping somebody would throw me a sunglasses gift sometime so I can have my sunglasses. Of course, that's just a gratuitous ask for a gift. But anyways, sunglasses kind of goes along with my account, don't you think? Although if I wear my sunglasses in my studio at home, then my friend calls me a douche for wearing sunglasses at night, even though, what is it, Corey Hart wears his sunglasses at night? Well, maybe that was somebody else. I don't know.
He wore them well, too.
Oh, yeah, he did. Yeah, but if you're a rock star, you can wear... Oh! What? Anyways, that's amazeballs. That's amazeballs.
Oh,
I got a sunglasses. That rocks. Like I wish I could find a way to reward you. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Hilarious. Anyways, thank you so much for that.
Somebody says they're surprised about or confused about what the dog was doing during the attacks. I have to agree with them.
The dog was doing during the attacks? Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that's not a topic we're going to necessarily dive into tonight, but you know what? If we have time at the end, there's no reason why we can't. So maybe table that question. We got about 3 minutes, by the way, before we get started. Again, thank you for the gifts. That was super fun. I was wanting to find a way that I could have a special sometime, since sunglasses are my thing, to have like for every sunglasses that I get, I'm going to do something. But I haven't really decided what that would be. So maybe in the future we'll do that. I do have a lot to cover tonight, so we're just going to get kind of started, warmed up here. I'm getting warmed up. And yeah, about 3 minutes left, maybe 2.5 minutes, and then we'll get formally started with what I'm going to cover.
I'm going to step away for just a moment.
All right, we have a thing in the house that my wife needs to attend to. And so, by the way, as an aside, before we get going, and maybe I'll mention it again at the top of the hour, I don't exclude the fact that I'm going to cover some of the same exact shit when the top of the hour happens, but my wife does have now moderator privileges where she can handle things a little bit better. We had a situation in one of my lives where one of my guests that I really, really was excited to have on was kind of heckled by somebody in the live, and my wife had to pass me notes telling me to try to do something about it because she didn't have privileges. Tonight she has privileges, so my wife would be able to handle that if something like that happens again. I will ask as a prefrontal kind of thing, anyways, to avoid arguing and fighting in the chat if you can help it. Again, I'm doing everything that I can to avoid community guidelines violations. And one of the things that draws negative attention to our chat, of course, is people fighting with each other. So let's try to not fight with each other. If you find somebody says something super annoying, just let it go. I'm trying to work on that as well. I don't do the best at it, I'll admit, but on the live, I've got so much going on that I can avoid it. And I'll let my wife take care of just mutes. That's what I hope that she'll do first, is mute. So I don't like to kick people out of the live entirely. There are several levels, of course, of moderation that a person can do. A person can get kicked out of the live for the night. They can get kicked out of lives forever for me. They can get banned from entirely seeing my account entirely, or they can just get muted for the evening. And so the first step that I would ever want to do for a punitive measure is just to basically mute somebody for the rest of the evening and give them another chance next week. So I have seen some really good relationships come out of people who were rude in their first attempt to talk to you, but once they kind of learn what's not allowed and what is allowed, then you can have a great conversation. So we'll try to do that as well, and just kind of err on the side of muting first before any like super punitive, you can never come back to our show kind of thing again. So about 1 minute, and my moderator is not here by my side. She's checking on something in the house, and hopefully everything's good here. So yeah, I can hear my wife wrapping stuff up. She's trying desperately to make it back for the 6 o'clock time. Again, we are both simultaneously live on TikTok and YouTube with 2 separate cameras and 2 separate mic setups. Unfortunately, now that it's 6 o'clock, unfortunately my wife does not have a mic for YouTube. However, she's in the same room, so if she talks loud enough, not only will you hear her super loud on TikTok, but you'll be able to hear her through the mic on YouTube. I'm working on those logistics. And by the way, as a plug, I'm continually working and trying to make my content better and more accessible for everyone. So if you happen to love this show, my platform, or anything like that, and I don't know how many we have of that caliber, but if you do, I could use some help with some various things. One, for example, is I'm going to talk for an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes on various topics. It'd be nice to splice those into smaller 10 to 20 minute segments and post those on YouTube in smaller sections. But all of that editing time takes away from my research time, takes away from my prep time, takes away from some other obligations I have. So if somebody here has a love for the show and wants to help out and has got some, basic editing skills with Premiere or something like that, I could use some help. I can't pay anybody. This is all a labor of love from me as well. But if somebody just would like to see that as to help people out, get a smaller chunk, that's one of the things I want to do. Is I want to take, like tonight's show is going to have at least 3, maybe 4 separate topics, and I'd like to break those into smaller videos for YouTube for people who don't want to have to listen to 2 hours in a stretch. So let's get going. Tonight, once again, the focus is going to be 100% on Kohberger. The reason being is because after 2.5 years, basically, of an unprecedented gag order in the Brian Kohberger case, Judge Hippler has had decided to start loosening up the strings, if you will, the purse strings, if you will, and allowing documents to come out into public and unsealing things. So because of that, we are having new conversations about things we should have been having conversations about years ago. And so because of that, because daily new documents seem to be being dropped, and we're also approaching the trial in August. August sounds like a long time away, but if you're familiar with my show, I talk about motions in limine. So what's happening right now is both sides of the prosecution and the defense in the Brian Kohberger trial coming up are arguing in court about what will and won't be presented to the jury. So keep in mind, the great thing for our channel and for our discussions tonight is we get to watch the motions in limine. We get to watch most of that fight between the prosecution and the defense as they come to agreements on what they're going to say and not say in the court, and what things are off limits and which things are okay to do. This is a process that saves the jury a lot of time. The jury does not want to have to listen to a lot of bickering and arguing, and even the bickering and arguing can be prejudicial, for example. So, and that's hard to explain, but basically just saying that the prosecution wants something in there could make somebody who feels like Kohberger's already guilty be like, oh yeah, just the fact that they said they were going to talk about that, I'm all down for that. And even if the judge says, no, we're not going to talk about that, in the mind, the seed has already been planted. And so keep in mind that this is a podcast, a talk show, whatever you want to call it. People on the jury may or may not see this kind of thing. When they go to seat that jury, they're going to ask people if they've already seen things on this account, if they've already formed opinions and such. So hopefully you're not blaming me of ruining the jury pool on my own. I'm just one guy among many guys, many guys following this case. So we're going to get to some highlights on the back half of tonight's episode of from the actual documents that I want to highlight. One is going to be about what I believe is the defense setting up that they have a beef in particular with one FBI agent. This is Special Agent Nicholas Balance. And I'm going to show you what I believe the defense has been doing for a long time and what their beef is with Nick Balance. And so I'm going to show you why that's done. And again, I want to early on, for people who are in my channel and not sure where my stance is, let me tell you a couple things about my stance real quick. One, you should know if you have been here before, I believe in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. I am not against the idea that Brian Kohberger could indeed be the person who killed the Idaho 4 individuals. That is still a possibility, but we will presume innocence until proven guilty in a court of law, and we will ask questions about reasonable doubt and whether or not Kohberger had motive or whether other people had more motive. Every once in a while, I have to take a break and ask my wife if she has something for me. Anyways.
All you have to do is breathe.
I don't ever, I never breathe. All right. So we're going to talk about why I believe that the defense is setting up an argument against Nick Balance in particular. And the overarching argument is that law enforcement is overzealous and has basically narrowed down who they were looking for early on to the exclusion of more likely and more probable candidates. And so that's something we're going to cover in the legal documents as well as the pre-stuff. So half of this show tonight, the first half, is me rambling about some of the overarching themes and what they're doing. And then in the back half, we're going to look at the actual documents and the wording that I'm telling you is showing you that this is what they're doing and why I see it that way. Another thing we're going to talk about is the digital forensics specialist, Cy Ray. This is a huge issue, and it's also very complicated for you and for the jury. And this is one of the reasons why we are fighting about it, if you will, between the prosecution and the defense in the motions in limine, is this is going to be complicated for the jury as well as it's going to be complicated for you. So when we start talking about the nuances of the AT&T advanced timing records and what they do and don't show, and when the prosecution did and didn't have it, and what the defense says it does and doesn't say, these are going to be really fascinating things that you are going to find out about by watching this show, but the jury may never hear any of this. I want you to pay attention to that. Okay. So in the courtroom, they're deciding what the jury is going to hear. We get the benefit of hearing it all now and making opinions and forming opinions about it and having our thoughts on the matter. But the jury may or may not ever hear any of what we're going to talk about tonight. So if you are a true crime lover, if you really are fascinated with the story, that's one of the benefits you have of watching this particular show, is that you're going to see some behind the scenes, what may not be seen by the jury. And again, if you're a person who just believes I'll wait till the jury makes their verdict and that's what happened in the matter because I believe the juries always get it right, then just wait for the verdict and you'll be good. And then one of the last things we're going to talk about, go ahead, did you have something for me?
No.
Oh, I heard you choking up over there.
No.
Maybe you're just emotional on all the things I'm talking about. We're going to talk possibly at the very end. We're going to talk about the 3D model, by the way, as well. So one of the other documents we're going to talk about is the 3D model of the house, and some of the argument that goes along with that. So we're going to talk about Nick Balance. We're going to talk about Cy Ray. We're going to talk about the 3D model, and then at the end, if we have a little bit more time and energy, we're going to talk about Kaylee Gonzalez a little bit more and the wounds that she sustained. Not graphic. We're not going to get super graphic about it, but we're going to talk about some. I'm going to review some news articles with a whole bunch of details that always get overlooked, and I want to read them to you with fresh eyes so you can see what I'm talking about. It is very, very surprising and somewhat shocking if you haven't heard it for a long time, what was going on in the early stages of this investigation versus after they've narrowed it down and said Kohberger was the guy. So we're going to talk about all of that tonight. Are you with me? I hope that you're still with me. All right. So let me start with this. One of the things that I get asked a lot on by people who are irritated by me is, come on, dude, you can't possibly think Kohberger has any innocence in this situation. Literally, his DNA was found at the scene. Literally, he was stalking the girls prior to the murders. His car literally is seen leaving Pullman and he turns off his phone, and literally seen returning to Pullman from Moscow when he turns his phone back on during the time of the murders. And literally, all of these things happened. You have to be an absolute moron to think that Kohberger did not do it at this point. Well, let me address that a little bit. I admit to you, if all of those things can be proven true, then yes, it looks really, really bad for Bryan Kohberger. But at every step of the way, the defense is saying these things are not true. There is no evidence that Kohberger was stalking the girls. And I'm going to show you tonight exactly where that whole rumor, I believe, started, that he was stalking the girls. And it's horseshit. And I think you'll see it. So the defense is saying, no, Bryan Kohberger was not stalking the girls. And Bryan Kohberger was not heading to Moscow when you said he was. He was heading a different direction. And I'll show you why how they're trying to prove that. No, Bryan Kohberger's DNA was not found in the house. That is something that has been repeated by the media over and over and over again and is not accurate. And the only reason the wording has changed from the defense's stance on giving up on saying that the DNA wasn't found in the house is because the judge won't allow them to say that anymore. So they've changed tactics. And I'm going to do my best to show you what happened in that whole process, what the defense's original position was, what they had to change it to because the judge is trying to tell them that they can't say that, and why. And we're going to talk about that. And what it shows in the end is what I would consider, what I called tongue-in-cheek dirty pool by the prosecution. They literally are trying to stack the deck against Kohberger to prove guilt, and they're doing it very effectively in mainstream media and the public's eye, because many of you have already become convinced that Bryan Kohberger's DNA is in the house, that his car was at the crime scene and leaving the crime scene, and that he was stalking the girls, and therefore for you it's done. There's nothing else we need to talk about. That's enough for you. Now, even if all those things were true, which I don't believe are 100% true, there would still be some problems, lots of problems. So we're going to get into this in detail now. Let's go to, in my defense, I want to make a little defense about myself. I feel like I am not being closed-minded, whereas I think a lot of people who come against me on my comments and stuff like that absolutely are closed-minded. There are many, many people, for example, who say, I know Kohberger did it. Kohberger's guilty. Wait till they hang this guy. I can't wait till they shoot him. This is this guy's fried. He did it, and he thinks he's so smart. Blah 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 blah. All of those things are possible. That's something you won't hear from most of my critics. But I will tell you that there's a good reason to believe that he didn't, and there's questions and reasonable doubt. That's something you don't hear from a lot of the people who say, this guy's done, he did it, period. So I feel like I'm open-minded because I'll admit to you that Bryan Kohberger very much could have done it. I don't think that if he did do it, that he did it alone. I'll tell you that. But there's a possibility that he did do it. And so I would just ask you to weigh whether or not I'm being closed-minded when others will tell me flat out they know what happened. Kohberger did it. End of story. And I'm an idiot. So enough of that. That was a rant that went way longer than it needed to. Let's talk a little bit about DNA as an overarching thing, because I wanted to explain what I think happened with the DNA and the whole Bryan Kohberger's DNA is at the scene. And again, I'm going to show you documents here on the back half of this episode tonight, or this live, whatever you want to call it, in detail, so I can show you in writing where I think it happened as well. So originally, I want to cover what happened. And again, we might cover this in detail in the writings. The Brian Kohberger's name did not come up for about a month into the investigation. Idaho had no leads. They had no Brian Kohberger's name. Othram Labs was a laboratory investigating a piece of DNA, and Othram Labs for weeks had not been able to come up with any hits whatsoever identifying Brian Kohberger whatsoever. The FBI at some point in that investigation, and we can document when it happened, was working in tandem with the Idaho Police Department and co-locating, and this is why I say the defense has got a big beef with Nick Balance, because we're going to talk about the FBI and their role in the Brian Kohberger identification. So co-located with the police is the FBI, and the FBI eventually came to them and said, you need to look into and find a connection to Brian Kohberger. Till that time, and I'm going to prove it to you if you haven't seen it, Brett Payne from Idaho said they had never heard of the name Brian Kohberger. Brian Kohberger's name was given to them by the FBI. Othram Labs, that was doing DNA testing, could not link to Brian Kohberger. In fact, they had a low match to 4 brothers, none of which had the last name Kohberger. Nobody in his family tree. In fact, a document that I'll show you tonight, if I can remember which one it is, but I got them all bookmarked, so we're going to see it. I just don't know when we're going to get to it. Is going to show to you that there was no way they were going to be able to link it to Brian Kohberger. It was only after the FBI gave them the name Brian Kohberger that things began to be rewritten to tie Brian Kohberger to the scene, because they had been given the name now and they knew who to look for. So they didn't come to that through the DNA testing. And furthermore, Othram Labs could not get a connection to Brian Kohberger, and so the FBI took over the DNA investigation, took it from Othram Labs, and in their own laboratory developed a new profile, which was, surprise, surprise, a connection to Brian Kohberger, who they said you need to be making the connection to Brian Kohberger. So the FBI took Othram Labs' DNA that couldn't link to Kohberger and then made it link to Brian Kohberger. Okay? So, now, you can say, if you're the kind of person who believes law enforcement is always above board and does the right thing and is not liars because they're the good guys, that they just had better resources, the FBI, and so the FBI was able to do what Othram Labs couldn't do, and it's perfectly legit. It's just the government, the government had more resources, and so they were able to make that connection. No shenanigans were going on there. If you're a person like me who believes that law enforcement, in particular in high-profile cases, is swayed to making a conviction, then you will question how they got to that conclusion. When they already had the name, how did they make the connection and the link to him? Because they had the name, they just didn't have the DNA. And after they had the name, then they came up with the link to the DNA. So for some of us, that looks suspicious. I want to point out, by the way, that I did a short little TikTok video recently talking about, in the 1990s, the Department of Justice investigated their own forensic labs in the FBI and proved that the forensic labs of the FBI had on multiple occasions overstated their evidence against people and used the laboratory to create or fabricate evidence, is essentially what they're saying. That the Department of Justice admitted that the forensics labs of FBI were overstating their position. They were making connections that weren't supposed to be there. I'm using different words to basically say, as many ways as I can, that this was already investigated by the Department of Justice in the 90s, that the forensics labs would create the evidence that they need, and they would overstate the evidence that they have. They love to play manipulation numbers with numbers, like how much percentage chance likely you are to somebody else, without pointing out that all human beings on the face of the planet have 99.99% something DNA with everybody else. All of us have that big of a match. It's very, very little that separates one human being from another. So you can tell with DNA whether you're a frog or a human, but when you get into human beings, all human beings share a massively high statistical number of DNA. So it's a little bit of mind games and mind fuckery, if you will. I shouldn't use that word. Mind games to say how 99 point something percent chance likely that you're matching when all human beings on the face of the planet are connected by that kind of that statement. So again, if you don't understand these things, it's easy to persuade somebody that you've got something big there when maybe you don't. All right. So let's look at, by the way, I think we're at a point where I can bring up on the screen the Brett Payne article about Coburger. So this is, I'm hoping this is the right document. Yes. Okay, here we go. This is from February 26th, and if you're on YouTube, you're going to see this article yourself, so you can read along. If you're not, then it's story time, boys and girls, and I'll read it to you. All right. So, new details, the CNN, new details emerge in the case against Bryan Kohberger, the man accused of fatally stabbing 4 university students, dated February 26, 2025. This is pretty recent. Because of a wide-ranging gag order, prosecutors, defense lawyers, and attorneys for victims, families, and witnesses are prohibited from saying anything publicly aside from what is already in the public record. Statement fact number 1. For the longest time, Steve Gonsalves has been pretty riding the edge of having interviews with the press and saying, come on, man, tell people what happened. I'm not allowed. I've been gag ordered. I have a judge that's telling me I'm not allowed to talk about what happened to my own daughter. So you guys tell the story. Why won't you tell people what really happened? So this paragraph right here is pointing out what he's saying is that the victims, the families, and the witnesses have been prohibited from saying anything publicly. They're not allowed to tell you what they know that we don't know, because they're still acting under gag orders. As the gag orders are being released, we're getting to hear more and more. But this is why the families and everything have been mostly silent for so long, is because they're literally being threatened with law if they don't keep their mouths shut. They will get contempt of court charges. They will get told that they were violating a judge's order, and so it could cause major problems. So they've hushed everyone to shut the hell up about any theories they might have. Like, for example, Steve Gonsalves, who didn't believe, or did believe that other people were probably the target, or the main suspect. We're going to get to that some more in a moment. A lead detective in the case, Moscow police detective Brett Payne, said that he didn't hear Bryan Kohberger's name mentioned until December 19th, 2022. Murders were on November 13th, 2022. So for over a month, Brett Payne did not even hear the name Bryan Kohberger for a month after the killings, over a month after the killings. That was the result of investigative genetic genealogy that was being undertaken by the FBI. We had a phone call that evening, and we were told Bryan Kohberger's name, Payne testified. Payne acknowledged he didn't mention the investigative genealogy, genetic genealogy. You've heard this term used a lot, IgG. So that's what that is. It didn't mention the investigative genetic genealogy in a probable cause affidavit for Kohberger. What led to that decision, Taylor asks him. That decision was a collaborative decision, the detective responded. We made that decision in an effort to independently verify the information that was provided to us as a tip from the FBI. I want to break this down for you in a minute because it's important. In much the same way that we would any other tip of law enforcement. So, it was not in any way meant to obfuscate any sort of information. It was simply that we can validate Mr. Kohberger's involvement in this incident, or we cannot. That was it. As a group effort, you decided intentionally to leave that out of your affidavit, Taylor asks. Yes, ma'am. So, what they're saying, and what the prosecution has been saying, and this gets to the heart of the DNA issue, and this gets very confusing for a lot of people. The prosecution has stated we don't intend to use the IgG information. I will tell you my biased opinion about why they're not going to use the IgG information is because it was basically fabricated by the federal government, the FBI. The Idaho had no idea about Bryan Kohberger's name. As they stated in these paragraphs, they got the name Bryan Kohberger from the FBI, and then they followed up on Bryan Kohberger from that point forward because that was the tip they got from the FBI. It did not come from their own genetic testing, and the FBI did their own genetic testing after they took it over from the state and did their own testing. So they just basically said, hey, look, we're not even going to bring up the whole the DNA thing. That's an FBI thing. From that point forward, all we did is we followed up on the lead that the FBI told us. They told us the name Bryan Kohberger. So our case is going to be, once we identified Bryan Kohberger, that's where we move forward. Now, this is going to be a real problem when you get into the court case, in my opinion, and they want to talk about Bryan Kohberger's DNA is found at the scene. Because in order to find DNA at the scene for Bryan Kohberger, you had to use the FBI's steps to get there. They say they're not going to bring up the genealogy information to lead it to Bryan Kohberger, and yet all we keep hearing in the media is Bryan Kohberger's DNA is found at the scene. He's done. Okay, so what are they going to do in court? It's going to be really, really complex. Continuing on in this article, some big points. Unknown male B remains a mystery. The defense asked Payne about a blood spot on a handrail going between the second and first floors of the home. Lab testing linked the blood to unknown male B, Taylor said. The defense asked Payne why authorities didn't immediately search for the identity of unknown male B. Why did you not pursue that person? Taylor asks. Here we go. At that point in time, we already had received Kohberger's name, the detective responded. Are you listening to this? So why didn't you look into other suspects? Oh, because the FBI already told us it was Brian Kohberger. There was no need for us to look into other people. The FBI already told us the name Brian Kohberger. They stopped looking for other people once the FBI said, your guy is Brian Kohberger. That's what my interpretation of that article is saying right here. We're going to continue on. It gets worse. But, why didn't you look at unknown male B? There's other blood in the house. Well, because the FBI told us it was Brian Kohberger. So we stopped looking. And from what my understanding was, entering another DNA profile into CODIS, which is the system that basically checks DNA against known criminals, would remove the previous one that we had for the knife sheath, he said. CODIS is the nationwide combined DNA index system which includes DNA profiles of convicted felons, unsolved crime scenes, evidence, and missing people. So he's basically saying, hey, they already gave us Kohberger's name, and if we would have submitted more DNA, it would have removed that DNA from the CODIS system, and so we just left it alone. We already know who it is. The FBI told us it's Kohberger. We don't have to look at anybody else. Continuing on. So if memory serves, the discussion was, that we'll hold off. We'll stay with this one from the knife sheath, and if we need to, we can address unknown male B at a later time, Payne testified. It was not clear from the transcript whether the detective pursued any identity of unknown male B at a later time. So what are they saying? He's saying, yeah, we know there's blood of other unknown males at the scene, but we've been told by the FBI it's Brian Kohberger, so we stopped looking, and we said that maybe we'll look into those other people some other time, later. And it's never been concluded that they ever have looked into unknown male B. Continuing on. I remember that they asked specifically to consent to do certain types of searching. We had to authorize things through memos and whatnot of them doing certain searching. Specifically, I believe it was from family tree DNA that they needed authorization for, said Gamet, one of the people, the DNA specialists here, right? So many popular, this is the early argument, by the way, that people freaked out about. So the defense will say the prosecution illegally used DNA searching databases that they're not allowed to use. And most of the people who believe that Brian Kohberger is guilty said, who gives a shit? He's guilty. It doesn't matter whether or not police are allowed to search those DNA databases. If they found him in any database, that's enough proof. His DNA is at the scene. He's guilty. And most people don't give a shit whether or not it was legal or not legal. And again, some people, it's not illegal. It's just not proper for them to use it. Let's continue with the wording here. All right, so they talked about how they were asking to use family tree DNA, one of the two genealogy databases that allows searching by law enforcement. Payne said. Payne is a police officer, so he works for the Idaho police. He's saying, hey, look, they were going to use a database that is allowed, one of the only two allowed for searching of people by law enforcement. Another genealogy database that the law enforcement can use is GEDmatch Pro, so that's the other of the two. Genetic genealogist Leah Larkin testified. Those are the only two databases of significant size that allow forensic investigative genealogy, IgG, searching. Ancestry forbids it, 23andMe forbids it, MyHeritage forbids it, so on. So a lot of sites that do DNA specifically forbid law enforcement from using their information. This is for multiple purposes, in my opinion, and I'm trying to debate whether or not I want to give you my opinion on that because I don't want to waste your time, a bunch of things. But one can be because they know damn well their databases aren't super reliable, so they don't want law enforcement using them and bringing it into a court of law because it's not as reliable as they're telling you it is. Or two, as they will say, the people who submit to 23andMe and all these different places are not consenting to just have law enforcement come in and start seeing if they can place them at crime scenes all across the United States. If I want to submit to find out if I have a long lost brother or sister out there in the world that I don't know about, I'm not giving law enforcement permission to use my DNA and see if they can test every single crime scene in the United States or the world and see where they might be able to place me. I'm not giving them that consent. And so if you're not giving them that consent, you can't use that database. And you certainly can't use that database for that purpose because I do not consent to you checking my database and seeing if you can place me somewhere in some crime somewhere. All right. So That timeline is significant because Othrum's matches, this is talking about Othram Lab, who had the DNA and couldn't make a match to the DNA until the FBI came along. So we're talking about Leah Larkin, talking about this process. The timeline is significant because Othram's matches were, as in their own words, low. Those matches were low. In other words, there wasn't a strong match to anybody. She noted Othram had recommended testing. Othram said that we should test 4 brothers to get more information. But if you went out and you approached those men, and even if one of them said yes, you can test my DNA. The testing itself would have taken some time, getting a kit to the person, having them get spit, sending it to the lab, having it be analyzed, and it wouldn't have led to the crime scene profile because it was the wrong family branch. What does that mean? It means the DNA never reached Brian Kohberger. The 4 individuals that Othram Lab identified that was related to the DNA at the scene matched 4 brothers, and it was the wrong family branch. It would have never got to Brian Kohberger. That's what they're saying in this paragraph. That DNA never would have made it to Brian Kohberger until the FBI took over and made it get to Brian Kohberger. How did they do that? All right. So what's funny is the judge is indicating he doesn't want people to know how the FBI did that. He doesn't think that that's something the jury needs to get into. And it probably is too deep for the jury to understand because it's all genetics and it's all DNA and it's all stuff that the average Joe Blow doesn't know how it works. What is an SMP profile? They don't know these terms. And so they either get super educated and try to keep them awake as you explain to them how genealogy works, or you just say, nah, it doesn't go in. We're not going to talk about it. It's not important. We got enough evidence other places. And that may be true, but you can't then keep telling the public his DNA is at the scene. If you're not going to bring it up in court that his DNA is at the scene, then quit talking about it on the news. And for God's sake, have people stop coming to me telling me, well, yeah, he's guilty. His DNA was at the scene. We're not even sure if they're going to be able to present that and what they're going to present. Am I making any sense, by the way, so far? We're going to continue on. And by the way, one of those brothers was approached. I didn't know if I told you this before. One of those brothers was approached by law enforcement because remember they said, hey, the FBI recommended you get one of those brothers to submit their DNA voluntarily so we can help continue to do our testing. That brother told them to pack sand. I think they stopped after that guy. They went to one of the brothers. They said, hey, we really want to get some more DNA profile for you to help make a case that we're trying to make. And he said, screw you. I'm not giving you my DNA for that purpose. That itself could be suspicious. Why does that brother not want them to test his DNA? Whatever the case may be, they attempted at least one of the brothers, and he said, no, not giving you the DNA. But it was a family branch that doesn't go to Coburger. Let's not forget this. So going from low matches to an ID, or at least a tip, whatever they were calling it, within 9 days, that right there told me that they had gone into a database that they're not supposed to. CNN has reached out to the FBI for a response to the accusation that it used genealogical databases inappropriately. Prosecutors did not directly respond to that claim during the hearing. So what they're saying is an expert said, you couldn't have got to Brian Kohberger through legitimate sources. You had to have used an illegitimate source, and they knew it because of the time frame that they made the connection to Brian Kohberger and suddenly had his name. And when they called him on it, the prosecution was just like, we're not gonna talk about that. FBI told us it's Kohberger, period. Unlike GEDmatch Pro, which is smaller and allows law enforcement searches, GEDmatch is just a super open database and does not allow searches for criminal investigations. There's a reason for that. Anyways, eventually the FBI admitted that they had uploaded to MyHeritage, a database that is off limits to law enforcement, Larkin said, citing a document shared with the court. So again, you have an expert who says the FBI had to have used an illegal, not illegal, that's probably not the word, a database that is off limits and not authorized for law enforcement to use. I know a lot of you get really hung up on me using the word illegal because they're like, there's nothing illegal about doing it. It may not have been appropriate. It may not be authorized by law enforcement, but it's not illegal. Okay. True. I don't know that any officer is going to go to jail or anybody in the federal government is going to be facing charges for using the database, but it's forbidden from law enforcement to use that, and they used it anyways. But Gonsalves' family, Kaylee's parents, have expressed relief that the judge did not suppress the genetic genealogy evidence. So that's just the family's. The Gonsalves family is in a weird situation. Steve Gonsalves has repeatedly stated that he thinks that law enforcement too early ruled out other people, and that he's open to the we're going to see this, by the way, in case you think I'm lying. Steve Gonzalez has said he's open to the possibility Brian Kohberger wasn't the guy. At least at one point he said that. His wife was not willing to say that. She's all in. Brian Kohberger's the guy, and I want him to get shot. I want him done. Well, I don't think she said wanted him to get shot, but she believes he's the guy. Steve has questions to say, I don't know, and I'm not willing to go all in on Brian Kohberger. I'm keeping an open mind. Well, let's see where it goes. All right. So we talked a little bit, or we talked a lot about DNA and the fight that's going on with DNA. And what the jury is going to see and not see is really going to be difficult to tell. And we're going to talk about how next, I think we're going to talk about how Nick Balance, this is a special agent of the FBI, Nicholas Balance, has been targeted over and over again in the wording of being possibly involved with doing shenanigans, like building the profile or manipulating the AT&T timing advanced records. So let's pull up that a little bit on a legal document. So now I told you at the last part of the thing, and so we're about a half hour in. We're going to start looking at some actual documents. This was released just recently. March 26, 2025 is the date on this document. It is the basically affidavit in support of defendant's motion in limine number 2, vague and undisclosed expert testimony. This is a Brian Kohberger comes now to the court. Okay, we're going to get into the document because what I want to show you in here is wording that suggests that the defense has problems with the way the FBI interjected themselves into the case, the way that the FBI continued to be involved from day one, the way that the FBI was the one that gave them the name Brian Kohberger, and the manner in which Nick Balance has conducted himself in this thing. So let's read some very specifics. Comes now Brian Kohberger by and through the attorneys of record and hereby files an accompanying affidavit of Cy Ray in support of the motion in limine number 2, vague and undisclosed expert testimony filed with the court on February 24th, 2025. Now, by the way, Judge Hippler had so the defense has asked Cy Ray, and I want to get this clear. This might be a little early, but I want you to hear this from my words and my interpretation. Cy Ray has a really fun way of saying something later, which I'm going to read word for word. It basically goes like this. So Hippler said that Cy Ray didn't need to testify, that he didn't find it. So the defense wants to bring in Cy Ray, and Judge Hippler had said, I don't think Cy Ray needs to testify. It's not important. To which, as we'll read tonight, Cy Ray said, look, this is not a matter of experts arguing in court. I'm not an expert. I am the expert. I literally wrote the software you're talking about. There is nobody who knows this better than me. So it's not like it's the one expert against another expert. I am the expert. It was really interesting. So let me read that from his words and explain to you what his credentials are. All right. Moving down, we're skimming through. So this is the affidavit of Cy Ray. This is basically where he's laying out some of his, and this is what the defense is saying. Look, you need to allow Cy Ray to testify. This is what he does. In preparation for this affidavit, I have received the motion in limine number 2, vague and undisclosed expert testimony. I have reviewed all of the state. This is Cy Ray. I have reviewed all of the state's responses in reference to this motion, as well as Special Agent Balance, draft report, and final report. So again, Special Agent Balance from the FBI is being called out by Cy Ray, an expert in these digital forensics that we're going to talk about. I'm addressing the matter of FBI Special Agent Nicholas Balance's anticipated testimony in this affidavit, and what has not been disclosed. I have reviewed the initial reports, final reports, first discourse, second discourse, and now third disclosures. Sorry, disclosures, not discourse. Disclosures. Despite this progression of disclosure, Special Agent Balance's opinions on the relevant issues at hand still have not been disclosed. There's a disclosure word. All right, continuing on. I have reviewed disclosures in reference to Special Agent Balance's interpretations and opinions related to AT&T cell detail records. They are vague and at times contradictory. At this time, and this is the point, I'm going to have to get back and reread this paragraph. The prosecution is contradictory of when they want to and when they don't want to use certain records about the phone records. They want to use the phone records when it places Kohberger where they need him to be, and they don't want to talk anything about the phone records when it possibly can show that it doesn't prove that Kohberger is there. To which the defense is saying, you can't do that. That's called exculpatory information. If you are hiding exculpatory information, if you're saying, I'm only going to present the stuff that makes Kohberger look guilty, and I'm going to very specifically hide the information that is exculpatory to Brian Kohberger that would show that it's not what we're saying it is. We don't want that shown to the jury. And so far, the judges kind of seem like he's kind of okay with that. Yeah, you can just show the parts that make him look guilty, but not the others. And so this is basically, right? This is basically a fight, an appeal for the defense and Cy Ray to say, again, not only am I an expert, I'm the expert on this matter. Furthermore, I will not tell you. Furthermore, Cy Ray will tell you, in almost every case in his career, he has always been brought in to testify for the prosecution. I think this might be the first time, I think he says, that he's come in to talk for the defense because of the shit that they're doing on this thing. That tells you a lot. He always works with law enforcement to prosecute people and to show that they're doing it correctly. In this case, they are not doing it correctly, and he points that out. I'm always working for the prosecution, but this here is bullshit. This here is bullshit. All right. I have reviewed disclosures in reference to Special Agent Balance's interpretation and opinions related to the AT&T call record details. They are vague and at times contradictory. At this time, I am unable to identify his methodologies and or resulting opinions on most of his work, preventing me from any real analysis to determine the basis of his opinions. Now you're thinking, okay, so if you're a Kohberger supporter, you're like, well, if you can't make any opinions, then what are you doing here arguing? Bear with us. You're going to say this. The disclosures in reference to the facts and data relied on by Special Agent Balance to form his opinions regarding AT&T cell detail records are conflicting and void of substance. His work does not contain his methodology other than a paragraph. He does not mention AT&T handoff data, drive test mapping, or any other critical methodology that's required in the analysis. The report does not provide explanation of why Special Agent Balance may or may not rely on AT&T data, preventing me from any real analysis of the opinion. So again, what he's laying out is Special Agent Balance in particular is being inconsistent with how he's presenting his data, and only presenting the data that makes it look bad for Brian Kohberger. Point 8, I regularly work as a subject matter expert, and it is standard in my field for experts' opinions to be well documented and based on accepted best practices and methodology. Special Agent Balance's work is a departure from the field standard. He has not disclosed his methodology and analysis for his opinions. A, this is partially due to contradicting methodologies that have been disclosed. Then it says, B, this is partially due to vague work and product absent of any real substance as the facts and data. And C, this is partially due to changes that evolved through the iteration of work products without explanation and documented by facts and data as a basis. Let me talk a little bit about this if you're not familiar. There was a working document. It was an affidavit for arrest that was used for Kohberger. It was a working document. That document continued to be revised until it was presented to a judge as, here's the evidence we have against Brian Kohberger. That affidavit was continually added to once they got Brian Kohberger's name, and then they started backtracking and doing shit like, we observed a vehicle with no license plate, because they know now that Brian Kohberger had no front license plate on his vehicle. They did not originally observe that. The original writing in the document, as testified in court, didn't mention the license plate because they didn't know, that they couldn't see whether there was a license plate or not. And only after the FBI told them it was Brian Kohberger, and only after they found Brian Kohberger's car, and only after they discovered that Brian Kohberger's car didn't have a front license plate, did they go back and write into the working document that it had no front license plate at the house. That is not what was observed at all. And that document was presented to a judge. Hey, we want to go after an arrest of Brian Kohberger because a vehicle with no front license plate was observed at the crime scene, and he has no front license plate. None of that was true. And they did, and it was testified in court that was kind of a mistake. That it was a working document. They rewrote in that there was no license plate originally. They're bad, but it wasn't done intentionally, and it's not dishonest. It was just a working document, and therefore, oops, are bad. But you know what? The judge would have given us a warrant anyways, so it's okay. It's not okay, in my opinion. It's not okay. Woo! I talk a lot. How are we doing for breath? Do we need to address anything, Rhonda?
There's a little bit of an argument going on in the comments.
Ooh, let's not argue. I don't.
So they're talking about the DNA obtained from the knife sheath. Maybe you could clarify that again, how that was obtained.
So the DNA on the knife sheath is a big issue, and I think, like we talked a little bit again. So again, this was a speck of DNA the size of a grain of dust, a sand, if you will, that was found on there and referred to as touch DNA. The Othram Labs could not find a match to Brian Kohberger. It was basically an unknown sample, and in fact, that sample did link to potentially 4 brothers, which they wanted to get more information about the brothers so they can continue to try to figure out the family history, the family tree. Those brothers do not link up to the Brian Kohberger side of the family. The FBI later took over that investigation of the DNA. It had not been matched to Brian Kohberger. Brian Kohberger's name was brought up by the FBI. They took over the DNA, and then they said, hey, by the way, we've continued to develop that DNA sample, and now we can make a match to DNA to Brian Kohberger. But really, here's where it gets super confusing, and I think I'm sidetracking too much, but I wanted to address the question that was asked. Ultimately, what they're coming up to is not even Brian Kohberger's DNA per se. It's Brian Kohberger's father in Pennsylvania, who they got his father's DNA out of the trash in Pennsylvania and said that DNA of Brian Kohberger's father is really highly likely the father of whoever's DNA is left in the house. Again, not directly saying Brian Kohberger's DNA, it's just like there's a really high probability that the DNA of Brian Kohberger's father is the father of the suspect DNA at the house. That's so confusing, right? But there's a difference between saying Brian Kohberger's DNA was found in the house and Brian Kohberger's father's DNA seems to be a biological match for the person in the house. It's slightly different. It's nuanced.
And how do the legal documents say that they obtained Kohberger's DNA? Was it a buccal swab?
They did get a buccal swab of Kohberger's DNA, but the DNA on the knife sheath was taken from a swab off of a buckle on the knife sheath. That's a little bit outside the. Let's table that a little bit because again, we're getting away from the special agent balance stuff on the AT&T records, which is a big portion of tonight. I'm not saying that those are not great questions. We've talked about it on other lives. We'll talk about it again maybe at the end if we have time. But let's get through these documents that I already want to get through, and we're running out of time. So I don't mean to cut it off, other than we just sidetracked quite a bit from the document at hand. I did notice that Special Agent Balance was a dual role in this case. He was an expert witness for the state and using the same skills that he was involved in the actual investigation from the onset. He was co-located with investigators throughout the investigation. His opinions and interpretations were relied on by investigators and prosecutors. These interpretations and opinions found their way into every probable cause statement supporting search warrants against the defendant. He is referenced in nearly every search warrant issued, meaning he, Special Agent Nick Balance. He is referenced in nearly every search warrant issued. His opinions and interpretations were an integral piece of building probable cause against the defendant. Let's stop here and analyze running that through the universal translator. The defense is setting up that Nick Balance is a problem. Nick Balance worked with the FBI. He was co-located with the Idaho police essentially from day one. Nick Balance is the one that told them Kohberger's name. Nick Balance is the one that told them they needed to look for Brian Kohberger. Nick Balance was the one that told them Brian Kohberger's license plate is missing, and then they rewrote it into the affidavit to get an arrest warrant for Brian Kohberger. Nick Balance, Nick Balance, Nick Balance. Everything that's set up and signed by the Idaho police to go after Kohberger came essentially with some kind of signature or tie-in with Nick Balance. So this is why I believe that the defense is cleverly setting up a scenario in which Nick Balance may have a reason to implicate Brian Kohberger at the exclusion of any other possible suspects. And then the question becomes why? And by the way, if you don't know, and you've probably heard me say this before, the prosecution has already asked the judge, please don't allow the defense to suggest that there's anybody else involved in this crime. I mean, that's the whole purpose of reasonable doubt, is that telling a jury that there's a possibility that somebody else could have done this. That's how you talk about reasonable doubt. But the prosecution is asking the judge, please do not allow the defense to bring up the idea that somebody else could have done this unless they have proof. So unless they have proof, they can't interject the doubt into the jury's mind that it could be somebody else. You need to come forward with proof, which is horseshit. I don't even understand that. Continuing on. Unfortunately, most of his opinions and interpret. This is about Special Agent Balance. Unfortunately, most of his opinions and interpretations provided to investigators and prosecutors are not supported by the evidence in the case. So in other words, it's another way of running it through the Universal Translator. Balance is making some of this stuff up. And I have to verify myself for TikTok. Thank you, buddy. All right. Point B. It is this very reason that I was awaiting Special Agent Balance's report detailing the facts, data, methodology, and analysis that he relied on to make such egregious errors. I expected to see work that explained the conclusions as well as properly addressing the omitted analysis and errors in the work. And then C, the omitted work in this case is exculpatory to Mr. Kohberger. What does that mean? What does that mean in legal terms? What it means is the parts that Special Agent Balance are leaving out are exculpatory to Brian Kohberger. In other words, they will lead to the real possibility that Brian Kohberger could not be the guy. And so the parts that Special Agent Balance is leaving out of the discussion are the parts that would make a person question whether Kohberger was guilty or not. All right. Continuing on.
So someone wants to know if Brady violations will be brought up in this case.
Brady violations have already been brought up in this case. There's ongoing discussion about Brady violations. And so, yes, Brady violations are in discussions. And there's been motions filed about that. If you don't know about the website, it's I could pull it up on the screen. I don't want to digest too far, but let's go to coi.isc.idaho.gov. If you're on YouTube, you can see this. This is the website you want to go to, coi.isc.idaho.gov, Idaho Cases of Interest. At the bottom, you will see trial court cases, CRO 1-24-31-665. This is the state of Idaho versus Brian Kohberger. If you click on that, you'll get good luck. I'll see you next year as you get done reading these. These are the documents that we've been covering as we go. Those documents are where you're going to find the Brady violations and those discussions. So thanks for asking, and thanks for giving me an opportunity to educate people on where to find the information if they didn't know that already. I'm trying to find myself where we're at the document here. All right. So Special Agent Balance did not include analysis of AT&T handoff data provided by AT&T for the defendant's mobile device on November 13, 2022, between the hours of 2:30 a.m. and 3 o'clock a.m. What is he saying? He's setting up, this expert, Cy Ray, is setting up that Special Agent Balance of the FBI did not include handoff data from the cell towers on Brian Kohberger's phone because the handoff data would make it look good for Brian Kohberger. It would shed doubt into Kohberger's guilt. So Special Agent Balance just chose not to give that to anyone and to show them the handoff data. And the argument gets super, super complex. So thank you for the 60 of you who are still willing to listen to me ramble and to try to explain this to you as best that I can.
So the person that brought up the Brady violations?
Yeah.
I guess they were aware of that site, and they were just curious of your opinions
them.
on
Unfortunately, I don't want to get into my opinions on that for now. I apologize. There's just too much that I still have on tap to cover. That's a whole nother discussion. So I'm not trying to dodge that question. We can talk about Brady violations in the future, or you can look at my other podcasts if you want. I know that you're not going to do that. I get it. I don't blame you. But I'll have to table that for now because I want to get through these documents as much as possible. I'm already really long. All right. So yeah. Yeah.
Do you think the 7 minutes phone activity will be allowed that the prosecution is withholding?
Yeah, I'm hoping so, and that's part of what we're talking about now is that cell phone data, and it partly relates to the 7 minutes that you're talking about, and yeah, in my opinion, if Hippler does not allow that to be brought up in court, then we've got a very biased judge who I don't believe is doing justice to this. In some ways, Hippler's been great. He's removed the gag order, so I applaud him for that. But there are some things that, in my opinion, he needs to also do, like allowing them to talk about the AT&T timing advance records, letting Cy Ray testify, and talking about those discrepancy in the time, which includes the 7 minutes that I think you're talking about.
And can you explain what handoff data means?
Handoff data essentially is when one cell tower lets go of your signal and another cell tower picks it up for keeping your phone call going. That's handoff data. And so all of this big discussion that we're going to get into the nuances about handoff data between towers and AT&T timing advance records, which is not just a handoff data between tower 1 and tower 2, but if this tower pings you twice, your cell phone, how much time did it take that signal to travel the first time, and how much time did it take the second time? And therefore, I can tell if it takes longer the second time, you're moving away from me. If it's shorter the second time, you're moving towards me. So the AT&T timing advance records allows you to not only tell what cell tower it's pinging, but what direction of travel the vehicle is moving in. Because it's how long did the signal get to me? How long did it take? And if it keeps getting further and further for that signal to get to me, that means that you're moving away from the tower, not towards the tower.
Somebody said we need pings for roommates. I agree.
That's part of this thing as well, I think. Oh, God, are we ever going to get through this all? All right. The handoff data in the defendant's AT&T records during the time is exculpatory to the defendant. What does that mean? That means a specialist in data forensics is telling you the handoff data actually looks good for Brian Kohberger. It shows something that the prosecution doesn't want you to see. And Special Agent Balance is wanting to only show you the things that make Brian Kohberger look bad. Things like you keep hearing all the time, and people who come after me say all the time, well, Brian Kohberger's phone was pinged in the area 20 times before the murders, proving that he was the guy who did it. That proves shit. It doesn't. I'm on a rant. Let me slow down. I'm a little bit from that area. I went to school there. I know how close Pullman and WSU and Idaho Vandals schools are. They're practically touching. People go there I went to Moscow, Idaho all the time. For God's sake, thank God I wasn't implicated in a murder for being in Moscow, Idaho. It happens all the time.
Somebody said you should breathe.
All right. I need my meditative sloth behind me. All right. I have so much information. I'm trying to move fast for you, okay? I'm trying to move fast. Special Agent Balance did not include an analysis of the AT&T data regarding the 23 time periods in his report that he appears to be suggesting the defendant was at or very near the crime scene. In other words, he's being sketchy he just wants to say, hey, Brian Kohberger's phone was in the area a whole bunch of times, leading you, the public, to believe that means he must be guilty. Why is he driving around the King residence before the murders? He must be guilty. There must be no other explanation why college students from WSU end up in Pullman and vice versa, because that shit doesn't happen every day. But anyways, all right. There is no report or analysis. There's no report or analysis detailing the defendant's movements between June of 2022 and December of 2022, which would be needed to surmise the defendant's phone was at or near the crime scene 23 times prior to the homicides. There is no mapping showing the network connections relied upon, and there are no drive test coverage maps of the other than one cell site. So in other words, they have lots of cell sites they could be grabbing. They're only grabbing the cell site nearest to the King residence to say, look at how many times he was around the King residence. Not talking about all the other places he was going or could have been going and just happened to pass through on a handoff between one tower and another. They're just saying, hey, if he touched that tower at any time, bam, there's another hit, he's by that tower. Bam, there's another hit, he's by that tower. And they don't even look at all the other towers that might show where he was going and what he was doing and why he's pinging off that tower that might not have anything to do with him driving around their neighborhood. A recent disclosure about what Special Agent Balance may testify reads, handoffs are mapped on a case-by-case basis, which is determined by the needs of the investigation. From my experience as a subject matter expert in the field, this claim is outside of any established best practice or reliable methodology of analysis. The standard is that all data must be analyzed and considered regardless of how it impacts the investigation. What does that mean? Let's run it through the Universal Translator. Special Agent Balance states that he's going to bring up handoff information only when it pertains to the investigation. The expert, Cy Ray, is saying you can't do that. You don't cherry pick only the things that look good for you and show only that information. You need to let both sides see all the data so that we can make an informed position. Did Kohberger go that place all the time because he visited his sick aunt? Did he like a cigar shop? Is there another reason that explains it? So when you're saying we're only going to show They're only going to show the things that are relevant to this investigation. You are cherry picking the information that makes him look guilty. Thank you, by the way, or I don't know if you're talking to me about explaining it well, but maybe you're talking to somebody in my chat, but thank you. So, point 14, I have reviewed the disclosures about what Special Agent Balance will testify to and do not find the disclosure provides further analysis to support his opinions. A, the first cell site recorded in this session...
Yes, you.
Okay, thanks, great. The first cell site recorded in this session is the only cell site that is chosen based on measurements made by the cell phone representing the best signal from these measurements and ranking of surrounding cell sites. This theory can be disproven with the AT&T records themselves. So in other words, what Cy-Ray is doing is he's pulling out a paragraph that Special Agent Balance is trying to say, hey, look, we're only showing you the stuff that's important. And Cy-Ray's like, this theory can be disproven with the AT&T records themselves. And he wants to be able to show it because he's a freaking expert in AT&T cell records. And he's going to show you why he's the expert. This response does not explain why he would use handoff data at certain times while ignoring it at other times. What is he saying? Special Agent Balance is manipulating this case. He's only showing you the cell data and only putting out there to law enforcement and only putting out there into the media the cell data that makes Brian Kohberger look guilty and not talking about all the stuff that would make Brian Kohberger look not guilty. And Cy-Ray is basically imploring the judge, for God's sake, man, let us talk about what he just did. This is bullshit. He's setting people up. He's lying about what's happening. He's hiding exculpatory information. Let me tell you another thing that's going to happen from my opinion. If Judge Hippler agrees to not let Cy-Ray testify about the manipulation that's happening, there will be an appeal on this. If they convict Brian Kohberger, there will be an appeal, and that appeal will be based on this. The expert in AT&T Advanced Timing Records said that the data is exculpatory and would go in our defense and show that Brian Kohberger couldn't have been where they said he was, and it wasn't allowed in there by a judge that was not allowing it. And that'll be an appeal, and somebody will say, okay, Judge Hippler, were you biased? Maybe we need to retry this. Because if the jury had seen what you did not allow them to see, they probably would have come up with a different verdict, or at least it would have been a more fair fight. Purple highlights now. If you're, again, I recommend you follow along. This is the channel up here at YouTube. If you're not following along, then you can see these documents for yourself. The coverage. Oh, how are we doing on time? Oh my gosh, I'm horrible.
It's 7.
Okay, I'm gonna have to wrap this up. Well, not gonna wrap it up. I'm going probably another hour. But so if you need to, by the way, these are always recorded, uploaded to YouTube. Actually, it's going to be it's being captured simultaneously on YouTube, so you can watch this at your convenience if you need to go to bed. I get it. For some of you, it's very late, and some of you can only handle me for so long, and I can only yell at you for so long. So if you need to take a break from me yelling at you, get a nightgown on or something, or put some warm socks on, come back when you're in a better mood, and continue. All right. So the coverage maps are created using the actual measurements taken by the GAR and interpolation using natural neighbor algorithm. So natural neighbors talking about towers that are nearby. They're natural neighbors. In other words, it's looking at known values at known locations to determine the expected value at a location where a measurement couldn't have been taken. The natural neighbor algorithm was first published by Robin Simpson in 1981 and is widely accepted in both academia as well as the industry standards in determining the coverage of a particular cell site within a broader cellular network. So that was a quote that was used, and so Cy-Ray is commenting on it. This statement falls well short of any real disclosure of how the GAR product estimates cell site coverage areas. I have been in direct contact with the Gladiator Forensics, and this statement contradicts what Gladiator Forensics communicated to me about their own product. So what he's saying is their expert is lying or misleading you about what that does. I've talked to the expert who writes that software. That's not how it works. Again, this is one of the reasons why we're fighting this out here instead of in front of the jury, because the jury is going to be as confused as you are right now. They're going to be like, what the fuck? Like, I get it. It's complex, but I'm trying to do my best to try to break down as I understand it. C. A recent disclosure states, page 13 depicts cellular phone usage by 8458 phone. That's Brian Kohberger's phone number. They refer to it often in legal documents as the 8458 phone, the last 4 digits of his cell phone number. Page 13 depicts cellular phone usage by 8458 phone on November 13th, 2022, and Balance is expected to testify that when the 8458 phone interacted with the AT&T network at 2 o'clock in the morning and 47 minutes and 29 seconds a.m., the phone was not at the Brian Kohberger residence, marked BK on the map. Rather, it was southeast of Brian Kohberger's residence as depicted by the drive test data. Balance is also expected to testify that he analyzed additional handoff data that occurred during this data session and that the 8458 phone stopped communicating with the network at 2 a.m. 54 minutes and 45 seconds. Ray's explanation. This disclosure does not provide an analysis. This disclosure does not provide an analysis or opinion as to what Special Agent Balance found when he analyzed the additional handoff data that occurred during the data session. This is the very data that I previously testified about having been omitted from Special Agent Balance's work, product, and opinions. In other words, Ray has looked at the data that Special Agent Balance is not telling you about, and he knows it's exculpatory to Brian Kohberger. It's going to show something different. And he's saying, again, in legal parlance, for God's sake, let me explain what's happening here. He's hiding exculpatory information to Brian Kohberger because he just wants to show you the cherry-picked information that makes it look bad. 15. Special Agent Balance conducted a significant amount of drive test data, has not provided that data to support his work. Drive test data is collected when an investigator takes radio frequency survey equipment out into the field and collects signal measurements of the cellular network. By driving specific grid patterns throughout the area, it is possible to capture enough data to reliably estimate a cell site's coverage area. In this case, Special Agent Balance and Special Agent Kendi spent several days, it says Kendi, is it Kennedy? Kendi. Spent several days conducting drive tests in and around Pullman and Moscow. In all, they collected well over 5,000 data points, enough data points to effectively map the coverage areas of all relevant cell sites related to this case that begin roughly that being roughly 24 cell sectors. Special Agent Balance has only produced coverage for 4 sectors. Reading between the lines, they got thousands of data points from 24 cell sectors and only want to show you 4 cell sectors because that's the one that makes their guy look guilty. And
Kenty, I'm so sorry you're up so late. I wish we would start earlier for you.
Oh, somebody has to.
3 a.m. in England.
Oh my gosh. That's why we have recordings. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry that you have to go. I'm happy, I guess, that you wanted to stay, but I'm so sorry that you have to go.
I hope you don't have to go. They're just saying it's 3 a.m.
Oh my gosh, and I got almost an hour to go. I'm so sorry. All right. I wish I
asked, okay?
Yeah,
they're not complaining. I just asked.
Yeah, we might be able to move it to a different time sometime for those who are on a different time zone. I will consider that. All right. Special Agent Balance, in accordance with FBI CAST policy, had his work product peer-reviewed by another FBI CAST agent, as Special Agent Kennedy. So there it was Kennedy. Earlier they had a typo. It was Kendi. Now it's Kennedy. Okay, so that's what I thought it should be. There are official reports stating that Special Agent Kennedy did peer review Special Agent Balance's work product and signed off on it as being complete and accurate. A. I created the first subject matter expert certification course in the United States in this field for state and local law enforcement. This is Balance basically saying, okay, so you had it peer reviewed. I am the guy who did the very first expert certification course in the United States. I have taught this course for over a decade, certifying over 100 subject matter experts in the field. Part of that course includes the peer review process. The standards in the field dictate that data must support a peer review. I have personally completed well over 50 peer reviews myself. The state has not disclosed the required data to support a peer review of Special Agent Balance's work. In other words, I'm an expert in subject matter experts and peer review, and I can tell you he did not properly have his work peer reviewed. Special Agent Balance is doing some shenanigans.
Or some AKA some shady shit.
Some shady shit. All right. Now let's get into a little bit more on Ray. This is the second of 3 documents, so we're a third of the way through the documents, but I also have a really long news article to cover. All right. So document 2, this is the notice of filing affidavit support for defendant's objection to the state's motion in limine, AT&T timing advance records. And again, I apologize. Timing advance records are going to be confusing to you. It's going to be confusing to me. It's going to be confusing to a jury. This is part of the reason why we're fighting it out in court ahead of time to see what we want to waste the jury's time with in court. Comes now Brian Kohberger through his attorneys. And this is regarding the AT&T timing advance records filed with the court on March 17th, 2025. All right. This is another, I think, affidavit from Cy Ray. This one has some of those cool, not only am I a expert, I'm the expert. I have been working in the field of call detail. This is Cy Ray. I have been working in the field of call detail record analysis for over 25 years. I became a certified police officer in the state of Arizona in 1996. I worked with my first set of AT&T records in 1997. I spent nearly 20 years in law enforcement as the primary role of detective. I have worked hundreds of death investigations. I have consulted on over 1,000 homicide cases in my career. In my role as a detective, I have gained extensive experience utilizing call detail records and exploiting cellular networks for investigative related purposes. In 2014, I retired from law enforcement and started a business called ZX. That created software for law enforcement to map and analyze call detail records. This is where he's basically saying, I literally wrote the software you're using. As part of that business, we maintained software that supported every known call detail record provided to law enforcement in the United States. To date, the system has analyzed over 3 billion calls from call detail records provided by cellular phone companies in the United States. In 2021, LexisNexis purchased ZX, and to date, is still using and selling the software that I created. So even though ZX has been bought out, they're using the same software that Cy Ray himself wrote. As a result of this experience, I have worked directly with engineers at the cellular phone companies for over 2 decades, and I am intimately familiar with the type of data that they maintain in a normal course of business and provide to law enforcement through legal demand processes. The process. In addition to, this is point 3, in addition to my law enforcement experience, I have instructed classes on utilizing cellular records in criminal investigations for nearly 20 years. I have had over 30,000 law enforcement officers attend courses and or presentations on the subject matter. In 2014, I created the first geolocation cellular investigation subject matter expert course in this field I offered to state and local law enforcement officers. As a result of this work, I have established well-known and used best practices. He's the guy who wrote the best practices within the discipline of call detail record analysis. Over 1,000 law enforcement agencies have attended my courses on the subject matter of cellular record analysis, to include the FBI, the ATF, U.S. Marshals, DEA, and DHS. So what is Cy Ray saying? Again, in my wording, I'm not just an expert. I'm the frickin' expert. I wrote the software. I trained your law enforcement officers. I trained the FBI. I trained the ATF. I'm the guy who teaches you guys how to come to court with the shit that you're coming to court with. And I'm telling you, you're lying about the shit that you're talking about. I wrote the software. I know how it works. I know what I taught you. That's my interpretation of what Cy Ray is trying to tell the judge. Point 4. As a recognized subject matter expert in the field, I have testified on the matter more than 100 times throughout the United States in both federal and state courts. Apart from this case, this is where I wanted to make the big point. He has testified, what did he say? Over 100 times in the United States, in federal and state. And apart from this case, all of my testimony in this field has been on behalf of the prosecution. It is only in rare cases and circumstances I have ever considered working for the side of the defense. What does this tell you people? I know you want, there's a lot of people who want Brian Kohberger to be guilty, but this guy literally is saying, I am the guy who wrote the frickin' software. I trained your FBI. I'm the guy who's the expert, and I have always testified on behalf of the prosecution. But in the first time of my life, I'm coming forward to the defense because what you're doing to Brian Kohberger is horseshit. That's what he's saying. That's my interpretation of what he's saying. What you're doing is horseshit. I literally wrote the subject matter guide, the best practices, and I trained your officers. And for the first time in my life, I have to come up and say something because this is asinine. Now it's going to get a little nuanced, a little deep. Timing advance. Timing advance records are maintained by cellular network providers that provide a time measurement. This time measurement refers to the amount of time it takes a radio signal to travel from a cell site to a mobile device and back to the cell site. Given this signal travels at a known constant, the speed of light, it is possible to use measurements to determine the distance the mobile device is from the cell site. When multiple cell sites record timing advance data in short periods of time, it is possible to use trilateration to determine the location of a mobile device. The use of timing advance data in this manner is one of the most accurate ways for law enforcement to locate a mobile device. Given these records are available in a historical context, it is possible to conduct an analysis of timing advance records or data to pinpoint historical locations of a mobile device at a given date and time. It is also possible to determine the route of travel, stagnation, and when a mobile device is powered on or off. As a result of its accuracy, requesting timing advance data has become a standard practice for all law enforcement in the United States and is regularly requested through legal process related to a criminal investigation. Now, what I'm about to tell you is super hard to explain, and it's super nuanced, and it's even the argument of the defense is like, look, you guys are changing what you say about your own data over and over again. I'm going to try to summarize what you're going to see happen in the writings. So, what the prosecution is going to say, okay, so what the defense is saying is AT&T timing advance records exist at the time that Brian Kohberger allegedly did this murder. And the prosecution is not letting anyone see the AT&T timing advance records because they argue they didn't have it, that it was not made available to law enforcement at the time that Brian Kohberger allegedly committed the murders. Now here's where it gets super nuanced, so try to pay attention. It is true AT&T did not have a practice of turning over AT&T timing advance records to law enforcement at the time when the murders were committed. So let me repeat that because this is very nuanced. At the time, AT&T was not in the practice of turning over timing advance records to law enforcement at the time that Brian Kohberger was allegedly committing these murders. However, as we will see, AT&T did have and did collect AT&T timing advance records. It just wasn't their practice to turn it over to law enforcement. What prosecution will say is, we requested the data from AT&T, but it wasn't their practice to turn it over, so they didn't turn over the AT&T timing advance records. Therefore, the fact that we don't show you the timing advance records is because it wasn't given to us. What Ray is documenting is the FBI obtained AT&T timing advance records because the FBI pulled the strings and asked for it from AT&T. AT&T doesn't normally give it over to law enforcement, but the federal government damn well asked for it, and they damn well gave it to the federal government. And Ray has it documented. So what the prosecution wants to do is play shenanigans with you. We're not going to mention the AT&T timing advance records that might be exculpatory to Brian Kohberger and show that he wasn't where where we say he was, because AT&T didn't give it to law enforcement at that time in history. And that's half true. AT&T didn't normally give it to law enforcement at that time, but the FBI got it, and law enforcement had it, and they still have it, and so it's purposely being withheld from people through clever wording and manipulation. AT&T legal demands. During my career working with call detail records from every cellular provider in the United States, I have been involved with thousands of cases in which call detail records were obtained from these companies, leading the way in the establishment of best practices within the field of investigation. I wrote and provided custom search warrants for every provider and distributed them to thousands of law enforcement officers in the United States, assisting with the legal process of obtaining the vast and ever-growing amount of data sets offered by cellular providers. Run that through the Universal Translator, please. Ray is saying, I literally wrote how law enforcement goes and requests cellular data from all of the different providers because I know everything about it. I have worked with AT&T Global Legal Demand Center, GLDC, for over 15 years. Ray is not just a expert, he's the expert. I have firsthand knowledge, this is point 8 down here later on. I have firsthand knowledge and experience in working with individuals at AT&T associated with these other programs. One such individual is Boyd Jackson. Mr. Jackson is a program director at AT&T who manages many of the programs I'm referencing. Mr. Jackson is the primary contact for the FBI when requesting records outside of the standard GLDC process. Okay, what does this mean? Universal translator. Moscow police may have asked for AT&T records. That's the GLDC process. But the FBI had a personal contact, Mr. Boyd Jackson, who knew basically Balance, and they had a personal relationship. And that's how Balance got the AT&T records, the timing advance records, because he had a personal relationship with them. So while the Moscow police may not have been normally given it, FBI did have a relationship with inside AT&T and got those records. And he continues to show that. The state is correct in their claim that AT&T GLDC did not provide law enforcement with AT&T timing advance record reports until May of 2023. Stop. Again, the state correctly states, hey, AT&T didn't provide timing advance records until May of 2023. The murders happened in November of 2022. Therefore, they didn't provide that kind of information to law enforcement. That part was true. As a matter of fact, in May of 2023, the working group known as GLDC had only begun their storage of timing advance records. The first official release of AT&T timing advance records was not provided to law enforcement until June 15 of 2023 by the GLDC. So this basically, Cy is being fair. Here's the part that you got right. In 2022, the FBI obtained AT&T timing advance records from another source outside of the GLDC. Huge point, because he's documents how he knows it. So he's saying, yes, AT&T did not provide it to the state, but the FBI did ask for it, and they did get it. During the investigation, law enforcement obtained the following AT&T timing advance data. A. Two of the victims had AT&T phones. Law enforcement obtained AT&T timing data on both of their phones. Point B, law enforcement developed an early investigative lead in the case. That person had an AT&T phone at the time of the crime. Law enforcement obtained his AT&T timing advance data. I can tell you right now, I think I know who that was. So what they're saying is law enforcement had an early lead in the case, and that person also had an AT&T phone. I believe that early lead was Jack DeCoeur, boyfriend of Kaylee Gonzalez. Also had an AT&T phone, I believe. So that's what I think they're referring to when they said there was an early lead in the case. They got AT&T data off two of the victims and another person who was an early investigative lead, which I believe was Jack DeCoeur. We talk about him on all kinds of lives. C. Law enforcement also requested a tower dump consisting of AT&T timing advance data. This request involved AT&T providing all of the connections between two specific cell sites in Moscow during a 2-hour period. The data produced was AT&T timing advance data. So that was the type of data. They got timing advance data. In all, there were 3,800 AT&T mobile phones identified in the timing advance tower dump. By the way, at this time, they were not looking specifically for Brian Kohberger. They were just asking for all of the information, and they got AT&T timing advance records from 3,800 mobile phones, including two of the victims and an early investigative lead in the case. Not Brian Kohberger. The AT&T timing advance data was obtained by the FBI using the internal source at AT&T, Mr. Boyd Jackson, who is not associated with the GLDC working group. Again, that's a bold statement. Cy Ray is not speculating. Hey, I think these guys know each other, so maybe Balance got this from Boyd Jackson. No, he's stating it as fact. I know Special Agent Balance got the information about timing advance records from Boyd Jackson. I'm naming names. Okay? GLDC was not used to obtain this data. So again, prosecution will say, hey, GLDC doesn't have timing advance records, and that's what we've used. Not all the way true. Yes, the GLDC did not have timing advance records, but you used an FBI source to get timing advance records, so you have them. So don't pretend like you don't have them and say, hey, we're just not going to talk about the timing advance records because we didn't have them. You're hiding it because it's exculpatory to Brian Kohberger. A forensic examination of the AT&T timing advance records in the state's possession show Mr. Jackson is associated with the reports. There is work product in the state's possession created by the FBI showing that the AT&T timing advance data was not only obtained but regularly referenced and used in the course of the investigation. Its existence is well known to the investigation and prosecutors. So again, statement of fact, not speculation, statement of fact. I know you have the AT&T records, I know where you got it, and you refer to it regularly. So quit lying and saying, hey, we didn't have the AT&T timing advance records. We're almost through this document, and then we have one more and maybe an article. In my review of the information, there is evidence to suggest the chain of custody involving these records and COA were produced well outside of AT&T's normal practice. There is missing information and data associated with this request. The prosecution's prior claims that AT&T timing advance data did not exist in 2022 further complicates the issue. It is my expert opinion that any testimony proffered on behalf of the FBI or AT&T on this matter will clearly reveal these issues. And then he's going to point out what it's going to testify. Let me run that through the universal translator. Prosecution is going to continue to tell you they don't have the AT&T timing advance records because that's going to look good for Brian Kohberger. And they're going to tell you that kind of information wasn't available in 2022. That is also only half true. So now let's talk about what he says he can reveal. In my review of the investigation, I have read numerous emails sent and received by law enforcement pertaining to their investigation. One such email dated 11/15, this is 2 days after the murders, 11/15/2022 was sent to Prosecutor Ashley Jennings at the Lehigh County government email address. The email is from Moscow Detective Lawrence Mallory. The email is informing Mrs. Jennings of Detective Mallory's recent contact with FBI Special Agent Nick Balance. Special Agent Balance informed Detective Mallory that AT&T can provide timing advance data and to make sure it is listed in the search warrant. Detective Mallory is specifically asking Prosecutor Jennings to make sure that AT&T timing advance is listed in the warrant prior to the report ever being distributed by the working group known as GLDC. Running this through the universal translator, not only do I know you did it, I can point to the email, the date and time in which you admit the FBI has AT&T timing advance records. They asked the Idaho police, make sure you ask for the AT&T timing advance records. They literally are still trying to tell you, hey, law enforcement didn't get provided that information at that time. Assholes. Why is that a fair trial? You guys should be outraged. Everyone should be outraged about that kind of manipulative bullshit. And if it's so evident that Brian Kohberger is guilty and there's no question, why do you have to play games? Just let the evidence speak for itself. Continuing on. Mrs. Jennings did respond to Detective Mallory's email inquiring on the specific verbiage needed to obtain AT&T timing advance records. Hey, I'll ask for that record. How do I ask for it? The email is abundantly clear. The email is abundantly clear evidence that Mrs. Jennings was not only aware of the existence of AT&T timing advance records, but also shows her intention to obtain it through the legal process from AT&T. 3. This email communication with Prosecutor Ashley Jennings is the same Prosecutor Ashley Jennings who filed this current and contradictory motion stating that AT&T did not produce timing advance records in 2022. Oh my God. Can you understand what that just said? The same person who's telling you, hey, AT&T doesn't provide timing advance records is in an email back and forth with the FBI saying, hey, how do I get the timing advance records from AT&T? And they did get them. So the same person who wants to tell you they don't give that kind of information is in the process and recorded an email asking for the AT&T timing advance records. There is clear and convincing evidence that not only was the FBI able to obtain the AT&T timing advance records in 2022, but they did so with the knowledge of the prosecutors involved in the case. So while the prosecutors are going to continue to tell you law enforcement didn't get that kind of information in 2022, there's documents, emails proving that they were asking for it, they knew how to ask for it, they had a connection inside AT&T with the FBI, they got that information. Does it ever feel like I'm beating the hell out of a dead horse?
You never.
Oh, okay. We're almost done with this document. All right, we're almost done with this document. In my review of the investigation, based on my training and experience, it is incredibly unusual that the defendant's AT&T timing advance records were not obtained by the FBI. The FBI demonstrated their ability to obtain AT&T timing advance records in November of 22 by obtaining AT&T timing advance records of over 3,800 mobile devices, none of them being the defendants. So what are they saying? You already admitted you got AT&T timing advance records on 3,800 phones. So now you're trying to pretend like you don't know what AT&T timing advance records were. You didn't get them. You've already admitted you have 3,800 timing advance records on different phones. 3,800 phones. When it comes to location data from AT&T, timing advance data can be some of the most accurate data available. Additionally, it contains connections to the network other than the typical voice, text, or data connections. This allows law enforcement to not only see more data, but more accurate data. Anytime a defendant's locations are in question, a timing advance report should be asked for as standard operating procedure. Moscow Police Department, by the way of the FBI and with the knowledge of prosecutors, demonstrated their awareness of this standard procedure when they obtained the AT&T timing advance data on over 3,800 mobile devices. So, reading through the Universal Translator, don't give me the bullshit that you don't know what's important about AT&T timing advance records. You already asked for it for 3,800 phones. You know what it is. And you know it's important. When detectives and prosecutors requested and served 2 different search warrants to AT&T on the defendant's AT&T account, they requested the exact same timing advance data they previously did when they obtained timing advance data on AT&T on over 3,800 mobile devices. What is that saying? Let me tell you what I think that is saying. They grabbed 3,800 mobile devices of AT&T during the time of the murder. That would include Brian Kohberger's phone. They're pretending like that never happened. And then they're pretending later on, hey, we asked just specifically for Brian Kohberger's phone. They grabbed everyone's phone, not just Brian Kohberger's. And again, they want to play the games of, hey, we did know about it, but we didn't know about it. We're not putting it in our slideshow about what they show because we didn't have that data at the time. I can't even really explain it to you other than to say that you can see the legal fight going on where they're basically saying stop the bullshit and let the expert who wrote the software come and tell you what they're doing with it. Additionally, on December 23rd, 2022, the FBI sent a communication directly to AT&T specifically detailing their request for the defendant's AT&T timing advance records. There is no reason to believe AT&T would not respond to this request. So at this point, Cy-Ray is saying, I can't prove that they got it from AT&T, but they got it for like 3,800 phones, and then they specifically asked for Brian Kohberger. There's no reason to believe they wouldn't have got it for that if they got it for 3,800 other phones. Or 3,799 other phones. It is my expert opinion AT&T timing advance data did exist for the defendant's AT&T mobile device in 2022, and that it was requested from AT&T by the investigators involved in the case. The investigators previously demonstrated their ability to obtain AT&T timing advance in 2022. Failure to produce the defendant's AT&T timing advance data is either a gross deviation from standard practice or intentionally withheld from release and discovery. That's a huge sentence. The fact that we know they got AT&T timing advance record for 3,800 phones and now pretending like they don't have it for Brian Kohberger indicates intentionally being withheld from release of discovery. They don't want the defense to see what the AT&T timing advance records say about Brian Kohberger. That's huge. Huge. There is no doubt the author of this current motion, Prosecutor Ashley Jennings, knew or should have known AT&T timing advance data did exist in 2022. She was directly involved in the legal process of obtaining it and was aware of work product created from it to further the investigation. The current motion is a deliberate misrepresentation to the court to further conceal false statements that are used to obtain probable cause against the defendant and conceal exculpatory evidence from discovery. In other words, they knew damn well where Brian Kohberger was at different times. They hid that information and provided a limited view to the magistrate to receive a search warrant for Brian Kohberger without letting them know all of the pertinent details about the AT&T timing advance records. Just the stuff that they needed to get a search warrant. This is why I tell you law enforcement needs to be held to a higher standard and they need to be criticized. They need to be scrutinized. They need to be looked at. I'm not trying to defend a killer. If Brian Kohberger did it, then let him be convicted. But play fair. If you have to lie, cheat, manipulate, steal, hide exculpatory information to convict a guy, that's bullshit. all day and twice on Sunday. Every day of the week and twice on Sunday, according to George Hitler. Or Judge Hitler.
Bullshit
sorry.
with a capital B.
Right. And last paragraph of document 2. It is in my nearly 30 years of working with and for prosecutors all over the United States, I have never witnessed such a deliberate attempt by prosecutors to mislead the court on evidence in such plain sight. Anyone making such a claim would have to believe the court is incapable of reviewing physical evidence in possession of the state and defense. It raises to a level beyond simple miscommunication or oversight, and it is clear intentional misrepresentation in the hopes to conceal a much larger issue. I respectfully request the court give this affidavit the due attention it deserves and explore these issues further. Now, let me say this. Hitler may not have understood anything that Cy just said until just now. This may be the first time Hitler knows exactly what Cy knows and doesn't know. Hitler was told early on by the state, we don't need Cy's testimony. Trust us. We got good data. You don't need it. And Hitler was kind of like, yeah, there's no need for like another witness to come tell us something about it. So this, to be fair to Hitler, maybe the first time Hitler is seeing just how much Cy knows and just how many times Cy is saying this is deliberate manipulation, and I'm literally the expert, not just an expert. I am the expert. So we'll see if Hitler agrees that Cy can testify. If he doesn't, I say there's something rigged in the case, because there's no way in hell. I don't know. I'm a layman, but when I look at his credentials, that guy seems to freaking know what he's talking about. At least let him have his day in court. At least let him make his argument. All right. The last document I have, The last document I have is a relatively short one. And then I've got an article or two that I would like to read to you, if you will permit me the time, that show a lot of interesting details about the case that are good food for thought for the evening. Let's talk about that 3D model of the house. Admissibility, demonstrative exhibits, and memorandum in support is what this is. Brian Kohberger is coming to the court, basically requesting them to talk about the 3D model.
What 3D model?
Of the house.
Oh, okay.
They tore down the house, Rhonda. They tore down the house, right? And so some people think the jury would like to have walked through the house and see it for themselves,
well, yeah.
right? Or at least at the minimum, if they're going to tear the house down, have a 3D model that's exactly inch by inch represented of where the actual corners in the house are, its line of sight.
It would be the same, no matter how good they made their cute little model.
Right.
It wouldn't be the same.
Right. It would be better for them to walk the scene if they really had questions. And that's impossible to do. No juror is going to be able to say, I want to see this myself. And they have that right. The jury should have the right to say, I want to, I hear your argument in case. I want to walk the scene myself. Absolutely. I want to put my feet in that house.
Right.
You can't do that.
See how thin the walls are, how
right.
much you can hear.
Right. Let me do the sniff test. Let me look at it myself. You can't do that because they tore the house down. All right. So here we're going to talk about the 3D model. My name is Matthew Nodell. This is who's giving this affidavit. I'm a forensic scientist with degrees in microbiology, medical technology, and forensic science, certificates in firearms, tools marks, gunshot residue, and laser scanning. My total experience includes 38 years of working exclusively in forensic science as outlined in the attached CV. That's his resume.
What's the CV?
It's a resume.
Okay.
It's like a Latin phrase for, I forgot, curricula vitae or something like that, but it's your resume. I have been retained as a consultant by the defense in Kohberger's case. One of my key roles in the case is to assist the defense team in investigating and reconstructing the scene. So basically, Matthew is being hired by the defense to help create a 3D model representation of the scene. During the course of my work, I have had opportunity to observe the scene. I conducted a 3D scan of the scene at the first opportunity provided by the defense. The purpose of the 3D scanning is a scene is to understand and depict the way a scene appeared and be able to troubleshoot the scene in a 2-scale manner. It is imperative to require the scans appropriately and register or stitch together the scans accurately to ensure that they meet evidentiary standards.
Why didn't they just put a fence around the original house?
The argument, Rhonda, was essentially that the house being there was going to be a trauma to students. Walking past it every day was going to be a trauma to students, and so it was just best in the sake of everything to tear it down so that people wouldn't have to be daily reminded about the atrocities that happened there. So it's in the public's best interest to tear it down.
I just don't know that justice can be served without it.
Right.
Properly served.
Number 6. I'm aware that the state has conducted at least one set of scans that depicts only the 2 rooms with the deceased in situ acquired in the first hours of the investigation, and a report that indicated a second set of 3D scans was acquired on or around November 1st. But the data has not been produced until recently, March 14th, 2025. Prior to March 14th, 2025, I have been provided with only the early scan data that depicts 2 rooms of the house. So in other words,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, I don't even have to explain it. Rhonda gets it. Like, only the prosecution only scanned 2 rooms on the first attempt. They did some other scans later.
A year and a half later.
And a year, right. And a year and a half later, they still haven't seen anything but the 2 rooms. And their own defense expert had to go in and do his own scans because it wasn't provided to the defense.
How nice of them.
Number 8, I have concerns about any replica utilized for trial that has not been verified as to scale.
So we can see.
What?
Scroll down so we can see.
Or am I not there on the screen? Number 8?
Okay, maybe there's a delay.
Yeah, there is a delay. There is a delay.
I can barely see 8 right now.
Yeah. I have concerns about any replica utilized for the trial that has not been verified as to scale. By the way, the reason why this is coming up is because the prosecution has admitted in recent court documents that they intended originally to have a 3D model of the house. When they decided to tear down the house, there was an agreement made that, hey, we're going to tear down the house, but we'll provide a 3D model of the house. And then later they changed their mind and said, you know what, a 3D model is not needed to scale. We're just going to basically have a little small model that basically shows the layout of the house. But it's not to scale, and it's not 100% accurate, but it doesn't matter. So they lied. They told the defense, in part, when they got the defense to agree essentially to the house being torn down, hey, we got a 3D model and we'll use the 3D model to scale. And they went later, you know what, a 3D model really doesn't matter all that much, so we're not going to do a 3D model. And their defense, the prosecution's defense to this is, we fully intended to provide a 3D model when we told you that we did, when we were going to, but we've since changed our mind because it's not necessary. All right. And then it says in here, utilizing a replica that is not to scale will invite speculation and confuse the jury, according to this expert. Once the download has been completed, the analysis will take approximately 1 or 2 days to assess the scan data. After my analysis of the scene data is completed, I will need to arrange a viewing of the exhibit and description as to how the scan data was translated into the actual physical exhibit needs to be provided. In other words, what this expert is saying is, okay, you're going to provide a not to scale but close replica. I need to take time to finish a couple days. That's all I'm asking for is a couple days to finish my 3D scan, and then come down and look at your scan and your analysis, your model, and be able to make comparisons. That's what he's asking for. Like, look, I did a 3D analysis of the house. Let me come down and verify that your model is accurate. So just more shenanigans bullshit with the prosecution. Hey, yeah, we'll tear the house down, but we'll have a 3D 2-scale replica. And then after the house is torn down, you know what? A 3D replica is not really all that necessary. And so this expert is saying, well, as a defense, they were smart enough to hire somebody to do a 3D replica, so I did. So at least let me come down and verify whether their model is really good enough or whether I've got issues with it. So that's another legal battle to happen. All right, we're at 7:38. You're tired of listening to me talk. You're maybe physically tired because you're on a different continent or you're on a different coast. You already passed out a long time ago and somebody needs to slap you awake for this part. I do want to show you a little bit of an article or two I think was worth. I don't know whether to do it or not. Like, I guess you could always check out if you need to. But I want to show you an article about the fight that took place.
Kimberly's still with us. Go, Kimberly.
I want to show you a little bit about the fight that took place in the house. Some of Steve Gonzalez's early admissions about the wounds that Kaylee received, and some of the really big shit that it talks about in these articles. All right, so let's get into this. All right.
Baby pink cowboy hat. How cute. That's their name.
All right. Idaho, this is from Fox News, dated December 12th, 2022. This is basically 1 month after the actual murders. Idaho murders. Father of slain victim says she had big open wounds and calls police cowards. This is Steve Gonzalez calling the police cowards.
What a poor guy. I feel so bad for him.
Yeah, it brings tears to my eyes to even talk about it. The father of slain University student Kaylee Gonzalez told Fox News Digital that the victims had big open gouges. Now, I believe actually that's a misrepresentation by this news story. Kaylee Gonzalez had the big open gouging wounds. I don't believe all of them did. Kaylee in particular, it's been repeated multiple times, had wounds that were far more significant than anyone else. and they were listed by Kaylee as big open gouging wounds. So we're just going to move past this paragraph, but I wanted to highlight it. They were clearly the work of a sadistic male, and he called police cowards for not sharing the information with the public. Steve Gonzalez said he asked the coroner, Kathy Mabbitt, how many times the victims were stabbed. She says, "Sir, I don't think stabs is the right word. I think it was like tears. Like it was a strong weapon, not like a stab." This is interesting, because some have maintained we're not even sure a K-bar knife was used in the killing. It could have been an axe, it could have been a machete, it could have been something else. The whole reason for believing it's a K-bar knife is because a K-bar knife sheath was left behind at the scene. Before they shut her down with a gag order and told the family to stop talking about it, and told the coroner to stop talking about it, was big open wounds. I'm not sure it stabs.
Really, it's awful.
Right? I'm not sure it stabs. It's something bigger, a bigger weapon. She says these were big open gouges. She said it was quick. These weren't something where you were going to call 911. They were not going to slowly bleed out, she said. Gonzalez said that his daughter's injuries definitely did not match Mogan's wounds. So Maddie Mogan was with Kaylee Gonzalez when they were killed. Her wounds do not match. He repeatedly stated the points of injury do not match. Her wounds do not match. It is completely different.
There has to be at least more than one weapon, maybe more than one killer.
Right, and that's what a lot of people are saying. But for some reason, some of us are called assholes for being disrespectful for the victims by trying to get it right. How many killers were there? What weapon was used? Was it Brian Kohberger? Or are you trying to plant him there or put him there because you've got a beef on this guy because the FBI said he's the guy? And you don't want to spend time looking down all the other leads because it's a lot of money and it's complicated and it's going to confuse a jury. All right. There may have been, okay, so continuing, Gonzalez said his daughter's injuries definitely did not match Mogan's. They may have individually died from the exact same thing, being stabbed, but there are more details, he said. They are not even close to matching. So what happened to Kaylee, his daughter, doesn't even come close to what happened to the others. He said ultimately maybe they all died of bleeding to death, but Kaylee's wounds were very different. The knife slashed open, I hate to be graphic, this is from Fox. The knife slashed open Kaylee Gonzalez's liver and lungs. This is not said about the other individuals. She got it way worse than the others. The grieving...
It's personal.
Right. Very personal. The grieving father paid for a copy of the daughter's death certificate, which included some of the details of her injuries, but he doesn't know whether his daughter or Mogan were the targets. I have my own suspicions, he says. This is her father. Now, I want to point out, Steve Gonzalez literally said the words, I paid for that. Meaning I paid for the coroner's report, and yet he was told not to talk about it. This is why I talked about it in a previous live, and I may have even shown the clip. Steve Gonzalez imploring the media, for God's sake, say what happened. I paid for this. I have the right to say it, and you're not letting me say what happened to my daughter. Let me tell people what happened to my daughter. Quit being cowards. Frickin' tell people what happened to her. But they don't want you to know. In part because they might not want you to know that Kaylee Gonzalez was targeted, that she was the only real target of that house. Why would they not want you to know that? Because there's absolutely nothing to do with Brian Coburger and Kaylee Gonzalez. In my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinion, including a lot of people even in the prosecution, I believe, there's no connection between Kaylee and Brian Coburger. She got it the worst. So they don't want you to know she got it the worst, because then you have to ask the question, what's Brian Coburger's beef with Kaylee?
So, Ms. Tranquility says she has a feeling that a female took her life. I don't know if a female could, but we don't know exactly.
Steve Gonzalez specifically says, it's interesting that you mention that, because Steve Gonzalez specifically says in this article that we're reading, it couldn't have been a woman. That's his opinion, based on the strength that it was required to do the wounds. So he's convinced it's a man, and in fact gets mad at anyone who suggests that it was a woman. He does, not me. I think it's legitimate to ask the question, so don't take that as me being upset. But Steve Gonzalez specifically said, don't say it could have been a woman. This had to have been a man based on the sheer strength. Now, maybe that's sexist. I don't know. There's a lot of really strong women, so I don't even want to get into that whole argument. But the point being is,
says, she wants to know if the dad's under a gag order. I assume he is.
Yes.
Do we know if that officially?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. His daughter and Mogan were ambushed in their sleep and found in the same bed. By the way, I've had multiple people bring up this idea that Dylan, one of the survivors, indicated that Kaylee ran down the stairs and said someone's here and then ran back up the stairs. That, to me, if that's happening, if there's a killer in the house and Kaylee's running up and down the stairs, she's not sleeping. Multiple reports all over the place say that the girls were both asleep in the bed upstairs. There's not talk about Kaylee running downstairs and running back up. Somebody also indicated, well, maybe when Steve Gonzalez said that her points of injury are different than everyone else, that he means she was killed on the second floor, not the first. No, that is not the case. Again, clearly, they state that she was on the second floor. In fact, the one statement that I think Steve Gonzalez says I was confused about before, where he said the suspect, didn't need to go up the stairs to get Kaylee. And I was trying to figure out why he said that. He didn't have to go up the stairs. The reason being, I think, is because of what's speculated in this document. The coroner said that she believes the killings started on the third floor. So in other words, he didn't kill Ethan and Xana first and then go upstairs to kill Kaylee. He started with Kaylee.
Oh, so she was trying to get away?
Right. So Maddie was killed in the bed, and Kaylee was pinned against the wall and tried to fight and got killed where she was in her bedroom. And then the killer went downstairs, allegedly. Or there's more than one killer inside, and one killer is killing people on the second floor, and one who has a personal axe to grind, and I don't mean that in a pun, basically went after Kaylee upstairs. So, although the coroner told Gonzalez that the victims died quickly and did not suffer, he said he is not convinced. Kernodle, that's Xana Kernodle, who had defensive wounds, and Chapin was found on the second floor. It was one hell of a battle going on down there from what the coroner told us. Please understand, I've said this over and over again, the time frame for 4 murders is about 7 to 8 minutes. It's
That's
just
if Brian Coburger did it all by himself.
Right. But all 4 murders supposedly happened in 8 minutes. Now the question is, according to this, it was one hell of a fight down there. So those girls, Xana and Ethan were fighting. They had defensive wounds, and it was described by the coroner as one hell of a fight. That takes time to fight. Upstairs, Kaylee was apparently awake after Madison was killed. That also could have been a fight. So, going on. I got outraged by them, not just, this is, I think, Gonzalez talking. I got outraged by them not just coming out and saying that this was a woman or a man, because they should know by the amount of strength that it took to deliver the injuries, he said. They are just being cowards. There are girls walking around the street right now that deserve to know they should be looking out for a sadistic male. So again, that's Steve Gonzalez is saying somebody with a lot of strength did this, and yet law enforcement is saying could be a man, could be a woman, we don't know. And he's like, you know damn well it's a man. No, that the strength and brutality of those injuries.
He must have seen her body besides seeing the coroner's report.
More than likely, he saw the body.
He
Yeah.
probably had to identify her.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, one more document, I think, and then we can be done. Murder. This is a long article, so I say it's one more article, but it may take me 20 minutes to get through it. Mother of Idaho murder victim Kaylee Gonzalez says the evidence shows that she was trapped. Again, this is for those people who say that Kaylee came down the stairs, went up the stairs, and was just asleep when it happened. I don't think that makes a lot of sense considering what they're saying in these articles. This story originally was aired on September 16th, or published on September 16th, 2023, and it was updated June 24th, 2024. Steve says that he believes transparency is the best path to justice. Steve Gonzalez wants the court to not be gagged. He wants to be able to talk. He wants people to be able to talk. He wants notes. I'm reading a lot into it, so forgive me if anybody knows Steve. I shouldn't put so much words into his mouth. But what it does say is Steve believes that transparency in this court case is the best practice for justice. I agree. Our court system should be open. This gag order doesn't do anything but lead to a bunch of speculation and rumors that make people look like assholes if it turns out to be wrong, when you could just tell us the truth from the beginning and let us go, oh, that makes sense. But you don't do that.
So somebody says your theory is that Kaylee was targeted?
Yes, absolutely. Kaylee was the target of the house. I on a previous live, thank you for asking. On a previous live, I showed multiple documents by mainstream media that said law enforcement also believed that Kaylee Gonzalez was the target. Only one student was the target. That was the early thought because of multiple things, including the viciousness of her wounds and other factors. But there are multiple sources that said law enforcement originally believed there was one target in the house, and that was Kaylee Gonzalez. So yes, I'm still saying Kaylee Gonzalez was the target that night. Xana and Ethan, I think, were collateral damage. They just happened to be in the way at the wrong time, which leads to the question, Dylan also was in the wrong place at the wrong time. time, why is Dylan still alive? Why is Bethany still alive? Bethany could be alive because she's in the basement. I've said that before. Dylan came supposedly face to face with the killer. He killed Ethan and Xana, supposedly, maybe just by collateral damage because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. That killer was going for Kaylee. That's my theory, and so it also leads to why Kohberger has it for Kaylee. We will get a little bit at the end of this on why Kohberger could have been going for Maddie, but I think that's bullshit, and I'll tell you why when we get there. Now, I want to show you another. This is where it's going to take a little bit of time. I want to show you another blows my mind. Olivia. Okay, so there's a sister of Kaylee Gonzalez, one of the Gonzalez family, right? Olivia, and it's Olivia, only with an A. So how to pronounce it? I try to get it right, and it could be Olivia, it could be Olivia, it could be Olivia instead of Olivia. It's basically a misspelling on purpose of Olivia. So I'm just going to call her Olivia. Pardon me if I'm not getting her name exactly correct. Olivia Gonzalez did a lot of the detective work for the police. Did you know that? This bothers me so tremendously. This article will show you that Olivia was the one that did a bunch of very critical early investigative work and went to the police with it because they weren't doing their job, in my opinion. We had zero. So this is when it says, as soon as the news hit, Olivia, the eldest of 5 Gonzalez children, and her parents went into detective mode. So the detectives apparently aren't going into detective mode, but the Gonzalez family is going into detective mode. We have zero details. We just knew they were gone. Olivia got into her sister's call log and frantically started cold calling recent numbers. She says a friend told her that Kaylee had been at the Corner Club bar at around 1:07 a.m. Police hadn't even figured that out yet. So now she's got Kaylee where she was that night before the killings. Police hadn't gotten that yet. And later texted a rideshare driver who Olivia also managed to track down. So she's doing this detective work ahead of the police. The rideshare driver said, this is according to Olivia, around 1:45, Kaylee had texted him requesting a ride from the Grub Truck, which is a local mac and cheese food truck, to take her back to the home at 1122 King, and she had with her another female. That was Maddie Mogan. Olivia then uncovered one of the most important leads in the case. Olivia, not detective. Detective Payne? No. Detective anyone in this case? No. Olivia uncovered one of the most important leads in the case. The rideshare driver told her about a camera that was mounted at the Grub Truck. So, Olivia says, I was able to look it up and find Kaylee on the video. I saw the girl and I saw that it was Maddie. And so at that point, I knew Kaylee and Maddie were together, and they got into the car to go home together and alone. The driver then told her the exact time that Kaylee and Maddie were dropped off at their house on King Road, 1:56 a.m., a timeline she said that she confirmed before the police. So she has to go to the police and say, hey, by the way, here's where my sister was that night. Here's where she's on camera. Here's who she got a ride from. Here's when she got dropped off. Am I the only one who has a problem with all that? Anyways, Olivia says Kaylee made a call to her boyfriend at 2:56 a.m., but he didn't answer. The Gonzalez believe that Kaylee fell asleep short time after. According to the police affidavit, Kaylee and Maddie were stabbed to death between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m., just as they had done since they were little girls. They were sleeping in the same bed. The killer took 4 lives in a matter of minutes. Peter Van Zandt is interviewing Steve Gonzalez here. How did your daughter die in the house? What do you know? Steve, we know the autopsy. We know the means of what was officially and how she died. She was assaulted and stabbed. 2 things. She was assaulted and stabbed. Christy, Kaylee's mom, several times. Her death certificate is the ugliest, disgustingest piece of paper that you will ever see in your life. Bad. Peter Van Zandt, and every line is a horror show. Christy, Kaylee's mother, every line, because there's a cause of death, and then there's contributions to death. What's that mean? So there's a cause of death, and there's contributors to death. In other words, she might have died another way if she hadn't died by the way she died. Is how I interpret that. She could have died multiple ways. There was the cause of death, the official cause of death, and there were contributors to death, like she would have died multiple ways. Christy and Steve spoke to coroner Kathy Mabbitt before the gag order was issued, and they say she told them how the 2 friends were positioned in the bed. This is according to the coroner. Christy Gonzalez says, the bed was up against the wall, the headboard was touching the wall, and the left side of the bed was touching the wall. And we believe that Maddie was on the outside and Kaylee was on the inside. According to Mabbott, the killer's first victim was Maddie, says Steve. And then from Maddie, he moved on to your daughter, you believe. She was awakened at that point? Christy says yes. Steve, there's evidence to show that she was awakened and tried to get out of her situation. God, this is hard to read. Christy, the way that the bed was set up, she was trapped, Steve says. Christy, she was trapped. Steve says the coroner told him the killer's rampage started on the 3rd floor where both Maddie and Kaylee had their bedrooms, and Christy thinks that he wasn't expecting to find 2 friends together in the same bed. So what does that say? Steve Gonzalez also says Kaylee was the target. I don't think he went in there to get to Kaylee, and he didn't expect Maddie to be sleeping in the same bed. Christy thinks, that's Christy's mom, sorry. Christy's mom says, Kaylee's mom, Christy. Good, I gotta slow down. Christy, Kaylee's mom, says that she thinks he wasn't expecting to find the 2 friends sleeping together. I do think his plan went awry. I do think that, he intended to kill 1 and he killed 4. So again, even the family is saying he came there to kill 1 person. That was their daughter. Brianna Fox also believes Xana and Ethan were collateral damage. According to the affidavit, Xana received a DoorDash food delivery at 4 a.m. and went back to her room on the 2nd floor. It's possible, says Fox, that Xana was still awake and came face to face with the killer. And she sees somebody that she doesn't expect, and I don't think he was expecting to see her either. He probably was trying to make a split-second decision to do I run away or do I kill her? What do I do? And he decided to kill her. That kind of shit is a little much. It's pure speculation. Hey, I think he probably thought, what do I do now? Again, it doesn't explain why when he sees Dylan, he doesn't do the same thing. Well, shit, what do I do now? Do I kill her too? Like, why not kill her if you're going to kill somebody else that you just unexpectedly saw? Anyways.
Someone wants to know what article this is.
This is CBSNews.com news article. I'll see if I can get my place back again. The headline of it, this is byline of June 30th, 2024 by Peter Van Zandt, 48 hours, article on CBS News. Mother of Idaho murders victim Kaylee Gonzalez says evidence shows that she was trapped. That's the best I can do. If you're not watching on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube up here, you'll get a picture of the article and you can read along word by word. Yes, I have theories about why Kaylee was targeted, and that's too long for tonight, unfortunately, because I'm at 2 hours and I need to finish this up for your sake and mine. All right. But
keep following and keep watching.
Yeah, please keep following and keep watching if you want to know what my theories on why Kaylee was targeted. At approximately 4:17 a.m., police say outside security cameras less than 50 feet from Xana's room picked up the distorted audio of what sounded like voices or a whimper, followed by a loud thud. Shortly after, Dylan, surviving roommate, whose bedroom was near Xana's, opened her door. Why was Dylan not killed, he says. Again, there's no definitive answer. He didn't kill her because he didn't see her? He was sort of transfixed about getting out? He didn't kill her because he was satiated? Or was he simply too depleted to kill again, says Fox. Again, Brianna Fox is just speculating all over the place. Brianna Fox continues on. Even stabbing somebody for a minute and a half, not only is that overkill, but it actually would be become rather exhausting. So she's just saying, he's exhausted. That's probably why he left Dylan alone, because he was just worn out after killing 4 people. Of course, there's a possibility that it was 2 killers on 2 different floors at the same time. For an offender to get away with a crime or murder, they have to bat 1,000, she says. They have to be absolutely perfect. If they make even one single mistake, that's all it takes. And that one possible mistake may have been the sheath to the K-bar knife, the one found in the bed next to Maddie Mogan. Oh my God, Brianna Fox, you moron. So his mistake wasn't leaving Dylan alive to see the killer face to face? That wasn't his mistake? You're like, he's got to bat 1,000. He's got to get everything right. But he made one mistake. He left a knife behind.
Bullshit.
What about Dylan, who saw the man with bushy eyebrows and gave a full description of his height and everything that was used to get an arrest warrant for Brian Kohberger? That wasn't his mistake? His only mistake was the K-bar knife?
Yeah, I totally think that Dylan was involved somehow.
Police Chief Fry to reporters. people of Idaho and those throughout our nation who provided information has been very impressive. We have received over 19,000 tips. Let me tell you something that's a little misleading. That's not 19,000 tips about Bryan Kohberger. That's 19,000 tips about everybody and their fucking dog. It's tips that include drug stories, drug hits. It's stories that include frat party revenge. It's stories that involved ex-boyfriends who were going to lose the love of his life and was going to leave him. Had told him she left him 3 weeks before and was going to move away with their dog. It includes all kinds of tips from all kinds of people. And at that point, it was 19,000. I think it got up to 40,000 or more. They continue to get tips in this case. And they're not 19,000 tips about Bryan Kohberger, if that's what they're trying to suggest in that line. Olivia Gonzalez continues to say, I remember thinking, I only have a few minutes. They're talking about at the moment that Bryan Kohberger was announced as the person who's been arrested in Pennsylvania. She said when they found out that he'd been arrested, that they identified somebody and arrested him, they knew they only had a few minutes to look up this individual and try and get any credible information before things start getting wonky. Because Olivia Gonzalez and her family knew that this shit was going to get covered up quick. And so she immediately went to detective work as soon as they announced that Bryan Kohberger had been arrested.
Yeah, I don't think the Gonzalez family thinks that Coburger's either the killer or the only killer.
They seem to be leaning that way now, but as people will say that have been following this for a long time, they clearly have changed their opinion. Steve Gonzalez was very open to the possibility that other people were the one who did it, and he's only recently said, yeah, it's Coburger. And so there becomes question about what has happened in Steve's mind. Is it just because he, like everyone else in America, says, well, his DNA is at the crime scene, and his car's at the crime scene, and his cell phone's pinging the house 20 times, and so he, like us, is going, well, that looks like he's the guy. He didn't know all that at the time, but he's hearing the same thing.
Else from us.
Right, he's hearing the same shit we are, which may or may not even be true.
Right.
There was also an indication that he turned off his cell phone, which is something that a lot of people do when they want to avoid law enforcement knowing their whereabouts. So Brianna Fox is just setting this whole narrative. He turned off his phone because that's what killers do. They turn off their phone before they go to the crime scene.
So somebody brought up a good question. In the autopsy, did it say how the blood in the body pooled around the sheath in her back?
No. Well, I haven't seen it. I'm sure it's in the autopsy report. I'm sure it's in the coroner's report, but I have not seen it.
There's a whole bunch of her blood on it, and then a speck of somebody else's. Is that how it goes?
They don't talk about any blood on the knife. So it's unclear. Let me tell you what I think they're saying. The only thing they're saying, so if there's mixed victims' blood, like Ethan and Xana, then they didn't talk about the mixed DNA samples. They talked about the one speck of clear DNA that belonged to one single source, and that's what they're focused on. So they're unclear and about whether or not the knife was bloody, the sheath was bloody, and whether there was just one particular spot on it that had single source DNA. That's a little unclear because it's under unprecedented gag order.
And someone wants to know what the most recent documentary is called.
I don't know about the most recent documentary on Kohberger. I don't think there's been one for quite a while. I don't think. All right. And by the way, where the knife sheath was found exactly is a little debated. Some say under the body, some say next to the body, some say on the floor, some say on the bed. That knife sheath seems to move around a lot, but that's a whole other thing.
It has legs, you know.
Right. Anecdotally, a lot of killers, so then they talk about how Bryan Kohberger supposedly went back to another house of the King resident after the murders, and then Brianna Fox again implicates Kohberger. Anecdotally, a lot of killers like to revisit their memory of the crime. And you know, I was able to get away with this, and you guys didn't catch me. And so again, she's laying the narrative down in cementing public opinion that Bryan Kohberger killed them, and then he went back because he's like, I got away with it, and I got to go back and watch my own work. Law enforcement recovered Kohberger's father's DNA from a trash outside their home, which tested as high probability of the biological father of whoever left the DNA on the knife sheath. I don't want to go into this ad nauseum. It's really late at night. I'm tired. You're tired. You want me to let you go. I got to let you go. But again, the DNA found that when all of you, I've said it a million times, I'll try to be brief. All of you are claiming that Bryan Kohberger was cleaning up the car of the crime scene blood, and yet what they found in the trash was Bryan Kohberger's father's DNA. His father was in the car with him on the drive back from Pullman to Pennsylvania. That's what they found in the trash bags, is his father's DNA. Not the victim's DNA, not anybody else's DNA, Bryan's father. And then they concluded, the FBI helped conclude, that the DNA of his father is a really, 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 really high probability to be the father of whoever's DNA is left at the crime scene. That's how they placed Bryan Kohberger at the scene. When the investigators compared the DNA to the DNA in the knife sheath, they say it was a statistical match with at least, this is a huge number, 5.37 octillion times more likely to be Bryan Kohberger's than anyone else. So there you go. That's the number. It's got to be Brian Kohberger. And again, the public will say, it has to be Brian Kohberger. It's 5.37 octillion% chance that it's Brian Kohberger. Continuing on, and oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. But you know what? This is why you've got a recording. So let me just get through this. We're about 2/3 of the way through this document. We're almost done, and then I will wrap up and let you go as quickly as possible. As the months pass, Steve and Christy Gonzalez remain a united front on wanting justice, but their weight has brought different perspectives. Again, remember, this is kind of early on. Peter Van Zandt, your mind is still open to the potential. Steve Gonzalez, of course. What is he asking? The potential that Brian Kohberger is not the killer. Your mind is still open to the potential that he's not the killer. Steve Gonzalez says, of course. Peter Van Zandt clarifies that this could have been someone else. Steve Gonzalez, of course. Yep. I go into that 100%, of course. Why? Because Steve Gonzalez also apparently believes in the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. His own daughter has been murdered brutally, and he's like, I'm not sure it's Brian Kohberger. I think the police ruled some of people out really too quickly.
So Mary, I think we've mentioned this over and over. She says, when will we tell us why we think Kaylee was the target? Because of her wounds. Because of her wounds, and it was very, very vicious. It was personal against Kaylee Gonzalez. And there's indications that the wounds were very specific in very specific places, which also indicates an intimate partner. And then there's a individual, Jack DeCour, who's an ex-boyfriend. She had just broke up with him 3 weeks prior and was going to leave the state and take his dog. And there are many people who believe that was one of those, if I can't have you, nobody can have you kind of thing. And he had more motive to exact vengeance against a woman who was leaving him, the love of his life, who may have moved on and even been with other people. Who knows? Like, I don't want to speculate too much, but the point being is the reason why I believe that Kaylee is the target is because law enforcement said one of the victims in the house was probably the target, and that her wounds were much more significant than everyone else, indicating the killer came there for her specifically. Now, I also laid out in a very long video, and I'm going to finish this article, so I got sidetracked. It's been asked multiple times, that Xana and Maddie were Kaylee's best friends. They all came from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. You know who they also came from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho with? Jack DeCour, her ex-boyfriend. That foursome all came from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. I lay this out in detail in a previous live. It's on YouTube in its entirety. You can watch how I lay it out. I'll even show the documents where they went to high school together. All these people knew each other. So it's very possible Kaylee was the target of the rage, and her best friends were taken out, Xana and Maddie, because it was personal about Kaylee. Kaylee was taken out and her two best friends. Ethan was just collateral damage, in my opinion, or my guess, because he was the boyfriend of Xana and unexpectedly sleeping there that night. He didn't stay in that house. He was sleeping there unexpectedly. So my theory is Kaylee was the target and her two best friends, and Ethan got it by collateral damage. So someone, and I'm so sorry for your loss if you knew with Xana, someone posted that they live in Coeur d'Alene and went to Post Falls and high school with Xana.
Yeah, so to clarify what that person's saying, and also I apologize as well for this difficult conversation. Xana went to Post Falls High School. Jack and Kaylee went to Coeur d'Alene, but Xana traveled regularly to Coeur d'Alene. So they, in that way, all basically came from Coeur d'Alene area. There's a bench in Coeur d'Alene commemorating the three girls in Coeur d'Alene as well. So while Xana herself did not apparently go to Coeur d'Alene High School and went to Post Falls or graduated from Post Falls, she did go regularly to Coeur d'Alene. So anyways, continuing on. And so Steve Gonzalez is saying, yeah, 100% I'm willing to accept there could be somebody else. That's not where you're at, though, Peter says to his wife, Christy. No, she says. She's all in on Kohberger. And Steve says to Christy, his wife, yeah, that's fine. In other words, they have a difference of opinion. Steve's open-minded to say it might not be Kohberger. I'm willing to accept it might not be Kohberger. Christy's like, no, it's freaking Kohberger. And he's like, that's fine. You can believe that. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm just saying that I'm willing to entertain the possibility that could be something else going on here. Brianna Fox, it seems that the defense is alleging there was a rush to judgment, that law enforcement made an arrest too fast and they focused on their client too quickly. Yeah, I think so. Brianna Fox, the defense is not necessarily having to prove that he's innocent. They just have to raise doubt. That's true as well. That's what the presumption of innocence and reasonable doubt is all about. There's other concerns, such as whether Brian Kohberger's car was accurately identified at the onset, or if it was revised after knowing what Brian Kohberger drove. This I covered in detail earlier. Pay attention. This was a really early article. What I said earlier was, They didn't know the vehicle had no license plate on the front of the car when they got the affidavit for arrest, which stated the vehicle had no front license plate, and we know Brian Kohberger has no front license plate, therefore we want to arrest Brian Kohberger. They didn't know that. They rewrote that in there after the FBI said, hey, the guy is Brian Kohberger, and by the way, he doesn't have a front license plate. And then they revised the document and said, it was observed that he has no front license plate. That was a lie. It was not observed that it had no front license plate. That was a lie, and it was written in after they knew Brian Kohberger didn't have a front license plate. Howard Bloom. The cell phone data makes one suspicious of Kohberger, but it's not convincing. It's not putting someone at someone's doorstep. It's putting someone in the neighborhood. That's Howard Bloom's early thing. He's not really convincing data. Brianna Fox. There's no DNA or forensic evidence found in the crime scene at the apartment, at the car, the office, or on Brian Kohberger's person. So they're basically alleging, how can you have committed such a brutal murder and have no evidence found on him of any of that? Not only is Brian Kohberger's DNA not all over the crime scene, when he fought, it was one hell of a fight. I showed you that article earlier. It was one hell of a fight. So he put up one hell of a fight and didn't leave anything more than one speck of a grain of sand of his DNA. You shed 30 to 40,000 skin cells every single minute off of your body. That's all he left behind. And none of the victim's DNA got in his car, in his house, in his apartment. Oh, he had so much time to clean up. No one's that good, my opinion. No one's that good. Brianna Fox. 3 separate and distinct male DNA profiles were found at the crime scene. 2 were inside the house, 1 was outside on a glove. This is talking about unknown suspect male 1 and A and B. Or B and C, maybe. Anyways, that's what we're talking about. There was other people's blood. They didn't focus on those blood because once they had the name of Brian Kohberger, they said there was no reason to look at anybody else. We know who did it. It's Brian Kohberger. We don't need to test other blood. We're going for Brian Kohberger. Howard Bloom. The defense wants to know, who are these people? What role could they have played in the whole story? Yeah, the defense should want to know that. That's called reasonable doubt. If there's other people's blood at the scene, who are they? Could they have been involved? Was there more than one killer? That's called reasonable doubt. If you don't allow that to come out in court, something's wrong with our judicial system. Howard Bloom has written, I keep calling him Blum. Howard Bloom has written extensively about this case, including a piece on the possible alternative defense theories, involving drugs. Yes, there is a really good theory about drugs. There's a good theory about somebody who went to prison because family members of one of the victims had ratted on somebody in the drug business to get themselves off on a drug charge and sent somebody to prison. And then that person got out of prison and came and killed their daughters and said, that shit's payback. That's a rumor, but there's all kinds of drug connections. But I only have time to invest myself in 1 or 2 theories and kind of hear those out until it proves differently. Oh my gosh, we're almost done, I swear to you. My phone's almost done as well. My own battery's almost dead as well. All right, Peter Van Zandt, I want you guys to respond to one thing that's out there. The speculation that somehow drugs are involved in the attack. Steve, that's just Hollywood nonsense. I dismissed that because I understand our society wants to believe that these, in some of these movies that they watch, that they don't have these crazy lives and they're crossing paths and with people like that, etc. So basically, Steve Gonzalez doesn't believe it's a drug hit. Okay. Not all that important. Brianna Fox. The defense is claiming the defendant Brian Kohberger and the victims have absolutely no connection. There's no motive. People have said to me before, you don't have to have a motive. Maybe true, you don't have to have a motive. But you know what helps a lot? Understanding why it happened. That helps you get the right person if you understand why it happened. If you understand why Kaylee was attacked so viciously and why she was the target, you get closer to understanding why it happened. So basically, they just talk about how basically right after the Brian Kohberger was announced, the family, Olivia Gonzalez and whatever, went and did some searching on the internet. They found an Instagram account. I'm kind of speeding through this because I need to let all of us go. They found an Instagram account. They found that there was an account that seemed to be legitimately Brian Kohberger's account. There was multiple Kohbergers, but there was one Instagram account that they believe was Brian Kohberger's and that he had liked, meaning like thumbs up or heart or whatever on Instagram, some of Maddie's photos. Not Kaylee's, some of Maddie's photos. Maddie was not the one brutally murdered. Not the one that got the most vicious wounds. It was Kaylee. So again, it doesn't make a lot of sense. If your whole basis for placing Kohberger knew the girls is that he liked some photos, maybe liked some photos of Maddie, and it was Kaylee who got the brutal attack, the most brutal, vicious attack, it doesn't make a lot of sense, in my opinion. But that's my take. I think we can wrap up there. So, I'm spent, you're spent. I want to thank you for hanging on, those of you who hung on with me this long tonight. Devil's Advocates.
Well, you have more viewers now than you did in the middle of this.
Yeah, right. So Devil's Advocates 2024 on YouTube. This whole thing has been recorded. Will be available for you to watch in its entirety. You can break it into small chunks. If anybody wants to help me break it into smaller chunks, that would be fantastic. But I understand nobody wants to do it for free. I get that. I'm not doing this for money either, so it's very painful. It's my whole life right now. So anything you can, and the sunglasses, by the way, the person who gave me sunglasses, that's real money. That's the first, not the first, but it's the first chunk over 1 penny that I get, so thank you. That was super appreciative. Everyone else, thank you so much for coming. You don't have to spend any money on this. This is something we're doing as a labor of love, but of course we would like to get some bigger following, get these numbers going so that some things can move in that direction, and this is what I'm doing for a full-time job.
That's the best thing, I think.
Yeah, YouTube is where as you can see, I'm not a 60-second kind of guy. I'm a long-winded guy. YouTube is where I can do long-winded. Thank you, everyone, and love that you guys came in here and hung out with me for your evening. Sorry for the people who are on the different continents. I will consider doing a live as if I have not enough time in my life. I will. Yeah, thank you. I will consider doing a live at a different time zone for the people who are on different continents. Thank you all and have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Don't say anything for a minute till I'm out of both systems.